Perfect. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hopkinton School Board's meeting for Thursday, August 13th, 2020. It is 5:30 and we have a full board with us here this evening with Rob Nato, Seth Aframe, Norm Goupel, Andrea Folsom, and myself, Jim O'Brien. And we're also joined by Superintendent Steve Chamberlain and Michelle Clark. So we'll start off our meeting this evening with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Steve has some great pictures of flags. Thank you, Steve. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we'll start off this meeting by stating that we, as Seth knows, we are operating in a completely virtual environment for our meeting this evening. There is no physical location, and we are able to do this due to the governor's emergency declaration and the governor's emergency orders, which has waived certain provisions of RSA 91A, which is the open meeting guidelines for the state of New Hampshire, which allows the governor's emergency orders and declaration allows for governing bodies like ours, the school board, to be able to conduct our business virtually. So we are broadcasting tonight this meeting over Zoom, and there are phone numbers for people who wish to listen in or engage in the conversation. They could do so either via Zoom or over the phone. And Steve, are we broadcasting this on YouTube as well? Do you know? We are broadcasting on YouTube as well, for those who are so inclined. All the other provisions of RSA 91A, the board will follow, and that includes meeting minutes and other parts of 91A. And then there will be an opportunity for public comment later on in the meeting. And those who are on Zoom will have an opportunity, if they wish, to provide public comments. So this is our third meeting this week. So thank you all, both for the board and staff, but also for the members of the public who've attended some or all of our meetings. So tonight's meeting is really there's on the agenda. There's more than 2 items, but there's really 2 major items that will be going through this evening. The first one is completing our work that we began on Monday with our first meeting to finalize what will be on the ballot on Saturday. And so we'll spend some time talking about that, and then we'll continue the conversation from last Thursday and then Tuesday and tonight around back to school planning. So that'll be the second part of our conversation tonight. So to start on what is going to be information session number 2, I'm going to share my screen. At least I think I am. And can you all see another boring PowerPoint slide? You can. Perfect. So what I've done is I've going to walk us through where we are with our planning for the meeting on the 15th, what we're required to do, and then we'll talk about some of the comments and questions we've received in the last few days. So tonight is, I guess, what's being considered virtual session number 2. So the governor signed something called House Bill 1129, which sort of sets the framework and the context we need to follow for our meeting on Saturday. So Monday was virtual session number 1, where we laid out what would be on the warrant. From Monday through Thursday, we've been able to accept public comments or questions that have come to us over the phone or via email. So our job here tonight is to consider and address those comments received from the public. And then our job is to discuss, debate, and then we're permitted to amend the articles that we spoke about on Monday. So we talked about two articles on Monday. The first one you can see here, which is the question around the rules. And so as we discussed on Monday, because of the passage of House Bill 1129, the rules by which we've been operating need to be amended. And so this is the language that we presented on Monday for the change to the rules that came from the moderator. We received no comments and no questions from the public regarding this question. So there's nothing really to review on question one. And so the next question for us is if there's any member of the board want to raise any questions, comments, suggestions for the language on question one. And like the public, no one has any comments or questions for this article. And so then I would just ask if there is a motion for the board to, and I guess, approve the language to be put forward for the voters on Saturday as presented.
I make that motion. Second.
Norm made the motion and Seth second. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none. Andrea.
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm.
Norm Gupel, yes.
Seth.
Seth A. Frame, yes.
Rob.
Rob Nato, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. So that has been approved and will be moved to the ballot for Saturday. So our second item that we discussed was the budget item that the board put forward for a recommended sum of $20,923,855. And so we received a total of 10 comments, including 7 questions and 1 amendment request following Monday's session. So I'm going to do over the next few slides is I'm just going to walk through first what some of those comments were. And I didn't, most of them were emails. And so I didn't cut and paste all the language of those emails. It would have taken a long time. We've all received them in our packet. And so I hope you've all looked at them. But I thought I would just pull some of those, what people said, sort of the gist of those comments. So we and the public are aware of what came in. I have all 7 questions. I think they were all worthy of us trying to provide an answer to those questions because there are not that many and they're all really good. And then we could discuss the 1 amendment idea. So in terms of the comments received, one of the comments had no stated opinion, but my read of the comment, and it's, I read into it being sort of opposed, but they didn't state that, so I didn't want to list that it was opposed. And so the comment was, we've heard about the hardship that a flat budget would cause the schools. However, I don't recall seeing what the impact of having virtual classes versus traditional school would have on our budget. I'm sure there would be additional costs. The budget does not seem to reflect the special environment we are in right now, economically and educationally. We also received 7 comments that were in support of the budget. And I'll just maybe summarize. Several of the comments had to do with the fact that we're going to be entering the school year with unknown costs associated with pandemic response. And they thought that the compromised budget would lead us to a better result. There was worry about the culture and values this town would come to represent if we made a decision to not adequately fund our schools. And they're pleased that we are there to make difficult decisions on behalf of the town. So the questions that we received, and maybe what I'll do is I have them here one by one so we can do the question. And then I think either Norm, Rob, or Steve will probably be best to answer the questions, but I think we could all jump in. So the first question was, according to House Bill 1129, should the proposed amendment warrant article fail, it's up to the governing body, us, to schedule another meeting before September 1st or vote to take on the same budget as last year or a flat budget. So the question is, has the board voted which it would choose? And if not, when is that vote to be taken? So maybe I can just answer the question, because we haven't voted. We haven't voted which one we would choose. I think if Saturday the warrant article fails, the board next meets on the 20th, I believe. And so it would, I think we would take up on the 20th what option we would have. And I think the calendar is sort of against us on this one, because under 1129, there's a series of steps that we have to take in order to have another vote of the town. And I'm not sure that the calendar by September 1st would allow us to do that. So, but the board hasn't voted yet. And so I think that's sort of the timeline we're under. Anybody else have any other thoughts on that one before we move on? All right, question number 2. This one's a bit of a longer one. So if the amended warrant article fails and the board votes to operate with the same budget, what will the tax impact be for the operating budget and for the previously approved warrant articles? And I don't know, Rob, or is this a question maybe for Michelle? I'm not sure who's best to answer this one. Or Steve.
So I guess I'll start, and then I'll go in terms of the tax impact, because that's a little bit different because of revenue. But the way that I see this is, if we end up with a flat budget, it means that we will not be expending $370,810, which would have had, as a standalone item, a 48-cent tax impact. So that comes off. So what would have been an overall tax impact of 7 cents would be reduced to a negative 41-cent impact. And I think there's part of this question speaks to the revenue side, but as Steve and I discussed, we're not voting on revenue, we're voting on expenditures. So that's where we would be at. And hopefully that answers the question.
Does anybody else want to chime in on this one? I think that did answer the question, Rob. All right. Third question. Can we get a budget and revenue summaries for the possible adoption of last year's budget? So we have the revenue for the adoption of the budget, because we have a revenue sheet which outlines our revenue. And then I assume at least for the total number would be what was, what we passed last year for the expenditure lines. But we don't have a separate, this is maybe a question for Steve and Michelle, but we don't have summaries at this point, because that budget is, the flat budget isn't really on the table right now.
Right. We didn't, we can't simultaneously create 2 different budgets right now. If we had to go to like an SB2, we would have to tweak our system to be able to create those 2. But at this point, we couldn't start with it. We have a school board budget in, and we can always tell what the impact is, but we can't go through and develop a whole nother flat budget.
And I would think if on Saturday our proposed budget doesn't fail, this may be something we would want to prepare for as the board would consider what those alternatives would be laid out in statute, but it's not something we have to prepare now. All right.
The board has talked about what the flat budget looks like, so it would be something in that realm.
Right. Just if I can jump in, I think, part of that list of what we would cut would be where we would be going. So I think it's fair to tell people that we've had that conversation and we're committed to, I should say that I'm committed, I don't know if the board is committed, to those are the items that we would be looking at to find that revenue or to take that off the budget.
So question number 4. So if the district does go hybrid or 50% capacity at all 3 buildings with staggered drop-off pickups from the buses, what are the increases in cost related to transportation expected with that scenario? And how will that be paid for if and when the proposed operating budget passes on Saturday?
So a staggered, so we pay for 16 routes or 16 trips, and we can delay the start and timing of those without any change in cost. So if we added routes or expanded, well, I guess I think we're okay. Those 16 routes, changing the times does not change the cost.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Steve. Anybody else want to answer this one or jump in on it? All right. Question number 5. This one's long. So the $391,000 line on the revenue page that I think we're all familiar with, slated to be used to offset needed tax revenue. So you think, keeping that in mind, if when the proposed budget passes on Saturday, as presented on Monday, would the less fund balance to reduce taxes line on that revenue sheet in the amount of $391,530 be obligated to be used solely as shown or stated on that revenue document? Can that amount be used partially or fully towards something else instead after the budget passes?
So the board voted by action item all the end of year financials in preparation for the audit and the audited created financial statement. So those books are closed, and if there's anything that comes up after this point, that has to go back to offset taxes per RSA. So the board doesn't have any flexibility anymore. They voted, and the financial statement has been created, and all we're waiting now is the vote of the town. I don't know if that was clear. I tried.
So it cannot be used for something else.
Nope. That was clear.
Now we're clear.
All right. Question number 6. If additional custodians end up needing to be hired, is there a way for those additional person or persons to be funded if and when the proposed budget passes on August 15th? If not, what would happen to that need and how will it be funded? So really a question, if we have increased costs, how would we pay for them after a budget passes?
The board has full authority to transfer items from funds from one line to another. So it could move from transportation to custodial, academics, or as long as it meets its statutory requirements, it can transfer. And that's what we've done. We've had some budget transfers, if you remember, the last couple of weeks just to close the book. So yeah, so it would have to come within the bottom line, but the board can transfer funds from different areas. That's how it would be funded.
And I think this question 7, is very similar to, it's probably the same answer for this question, which is really around any unforeseen COVID pandemic related expenses incurred. How would we fund those if there were additional costs? And I think the answer is the same. We may receive some additional relief funds, and we have set aside some funding, but I think the answer is the same. If we have increased costs, we could move monies through our lines in order to cover them if need be. So those are the questions we received. And then finally, we did receive a request for an amendment. And so the request was if we would amend the warrant article further to add a tax impact should the warrant article fail. So that's a request we received. So again, our job is to discuss, debate, and if we want to add any amendments or changes to the $20,923,855 budget amendment that we're putting forward. And so I guess at this point, I would just open it up for any comments, suggestions from the board on any ideas for amendments or any changes we'd like to make.
I can go ahead and go. I think in the language that we have right now for Article 3, we have removed any indication of a tax impact in any direction. And so I'm comfortable keeping it sort of as presented. I think that it can get confusing to add additional information in any direction. And generally speaking, in the past, I believe that while we've included the tax impact on the budget summary, or the warrant summary, we have not necessarily included it in the article.
I would agree, Steve. That's generally the practice, right? That in the budget information, but not on the actual warrants, are tax impacts stated.
That's our history.
Can I make a language suggestion? The last sentences there are kind of strange. The budget committee vote was 9-0. Doesn't say in what direction. The Hopkinton School Board recommends this article. The school board vote was 5-0. Shouldn't that be reversed? The Hopkinton School Board recommends this article by a vote of 5-0, and the budget committee supports the school board's recommendation by a vote of 9-0.
Yeah, we can change that.
We could also include in there the dates of those votes if we wanted to be specific as to when those occurred.
Can you guys see me editing this as I go?
We can.
Okay.
It's very cool.
Is it?
I like it. A lot of pressure on your neck.
No
No.
misspell.
All right, so we'll say the Hopkinton School Board recommends this article 5-0.
Right, by a vote of 5-0.
Can I just bring up something? I don't know, but and we've never had this happen, but so it's the budget committee's budget number that goes on the warrant. So I think that's why we have it the way we have it as far as the budget committee before the school board.
Oh.
Because looking at the language, it's saying the school district shall appropriate the budget committee's recommendation. So I think it might have to be the budget committee goes first and then the school board, but it definitely could have some of the language change that Seth had about in what way. But, and again, I don't know if it changes anything because of this uniqueness of where we are and, you know, we've never been here, but that's why it's always been in the past is all I wanted to just give information.
I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michelle.
To 1129 though, doesn't that aren't we the governing board body?
So that's why I just preface it and I defer
know.
to you guys. No, I know. And I just want it because some of, I have years of doing it as to why we do it that way. And so I wanted to make sure you guys had the same information that I and Steve know, and then make a decision based on that. I understand. Yeah, I'm right with you. That's why I don't know.
Do we need to have that language in there, or could we start it with just shall the school district raise and appropriate the sum of blah, blah, blah for the support of schools, for the payment of salaries? You
But
know,
it is good to show that all of the town leadership involved
That's
in
true.
for it. So
Yeah.
Steve, the language here came from the moderator. Is that correct? Sort of a sample language?
Yes.
Okay.
So I mean, I have no problem with it like this. The board, we can say the Hopkinton School Board also recommends this article by a vote of 5-0. I just want it clear that
Yep.
everybody who has touched this on these committees is in favor of it.
Yeah. Perfect.
So are there, so as it's on your screen, is there any objections or any further changes to the language?
I don't have anything else, although I did receive about 40 minutes ago an additional amendment suggestion. However, it does not appear it was sent to the school board email that we had outlined. And so I'm not quite sure how we would like to address that.
I believe that it was posted that comments would be received until noon.
Okay, great.
So it's not allowed, it's not accepted, correct?
I mean, the board could,
Andrea
probably
can make- Like,
vote to amend the rules, or Andrew could offer a thought on what something might look like, and we could discuss it.
I can offer up what was sent to me. I'll say it like that. So what was sent to me would be an amendment that would state that if the school schedule changes to remote only and the teams this is specifically regarding fall sports, the teams are not competing interscholastically, that the monies be returned to the taxpayers. But I would not personally be in support of altering the amended warrant. I would not be in support of amending the article to have that money returned to the taxpayers. I believe that what we've offered is very reasonable and is already quite lean. And considering the current economic reality and the extraordinary times in which we live, we're already going to be doing a lot on a very tight budget. So that was what was passed along to me and my take on it as well.
As much as I understand people wanting to merge the COVID problem with the budget problem, the complexity that adds, which I saw from the questions that Jim read, is basically overwhelming. I mean, we just can't deal with all of those potentialities that we just don't know. So I would not be in favor of that.
Nor would I. I can't remember a time when there was a, when we were on the floor where there was a conditional element to an article like that had to do with the operation of the school.
I agree with all three of them, Jim. So
Perfect.
Yeah.
Is there any further, is there any further items or amendments that the board member might want to put forward here to the language for Article 3? So I'm not hearing any. And so is there a motion to approve the as written here, the language for amendment to Article 3 that would go in front of voters on the ballot on August 15th?
I'll move it.
Second.
Motion's been made and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
Seth?
Seth A. Frame, yes.
And Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is yes. And so just the last item here is our last piece of House Bill 1129, which so everybody knows that the ballot will be available by noon tomorrow for printing. And so that will be on the district website. I know notices are sent once that's up and ready to go. And then voting takes place on August 15th on Saturday from 8:30 a.m. to 2 o'clock p.m. over at the middle high school. It's a drive-by voting. I think that's it in terms of our second virtual session. We've completed all of our tasks. Is there anything else anybody wants to bring up before we sort of close out this part of the meeting?
So under this rule, do we still provide a ballot for those who did not print it?
Yes, I believe that ballots, Steve's nodding his head, so I feel good about saying we'll be providing ballots at DriveThru Voting on Saturday morning.
The moderator usually asks for to start with 500, and then I'm on call if we need more.
We'll need more.
I think that's probably safe to say.
I just want to say thanks to the board for the last couple months of working, throughout this process and communicating this budget to the community. We've all been out there working, advocating for it. I just want to say thank you to my fellow board mates.
Yeah, I'm hoping for a good turnout and a good vote. So thank you all. So let's see, I just want to put this on so we can just touch base where on our meeting agenda. Are you seeing the agenda? Or are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Agenda.
Perfect. Okay. So we've gone through our two action items related to the vote on the 15th. And so we are here on additions or deletions from the agenda by the superintendent. Steve.
The agenda is fine as it stands.
And then correspondence.
There was a significant number of correspondence placed in the correspondence folder in the meeting packet.
There sure was. And there's no, I always skip over this one, which I apologize for. So school board comment, and it may be appropriate if school board members have things they want to say aside from the back to school work. But if folks want to talk about, their thoughts on Thursday's meeting as well as on Tuesday's session, sort of maybe we can talk a little bit about during our comments where we find ourselves as individuals in our thought process going into the discussion on back to school. That might be appropriate, but I don't want to tell you what to say, but that may help. So who wants to go first?
I'll start if nobody wants to start in the. I think I'll start by saying that this is, over the last, couple of weeks, but certainly in the last week, is probably one of the most difficult decisions that I've ever had to think about and will ultimately make a decision on. In reading some of the correspondence that came in, I want people to know that, I'll speak for myself, this is still the listening and learning process. No decisions have been made. No party, no group has any special influence. For me, when things come in, I take them on the merits of what is provided for me. Much of that has been very helpful. So, that's part of it. And where I'm at, I'll be honest, back in the middle of the summer, that was a pretty hard no. Like I really am concerned about going back. And I think that a remote situation is our safest call. As I listened over the last week, I'm a maybe, but there's a lot of variables that come into play. And, as I made my little grid at 4:15 in the morning, a couple of days ago, cost was high on the list. How do we determine that and can we afford it? Some significance around specific conditions that would have to be met, masks and dealing with temperature and capacity. I think there's been a lot of discussion about what we're able to do. I also think there's been a lot of Lake woebegone about what student behavior actually looks like in schools. And, they're kids and they behave like kids. And I think we need to think about that in the reality of how we structure things. I think regardless of where we go, I'm hoping that the school district is live and synchronous. I'm seeing teachers every day. No matter what. I think that, a lot of the following the science, but I want to follow all the science, not just the science that says our cases are low, so we should go back, but that's a conditional statement for me. And that means distance, that means density, that means certain unknowns about who actually carries the disease and in what way, and asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic, et cetera. There's a lot of things there. I'm thinking about equity for our staff. We've got people all along the range of risk. And I think that oftentimes when I was teaching, sometimes people felt like the school board was on one side and teachers were on the other. And I never really felt that way. I certainly don't feel that way now. I feel we're all in the same situation and we're working together to create the best environment for our kids and our teachers. Sorry if this is a little long, but I thought a lot about the social emotional piece, but as Jim and I asked questions the other night, social emotional concerns if kids are home, but also the social emotional concerns if kids are in school. And I think to times when there were school shootings, and Steve can, maybe, boy, after a school shooting someplace else, in Florida or wherever it might be, there was a lot of anxiety in our building for the days and weeks that followed. It was hard. It was hard for staff. It was hard for kids. Everybody was kind of edgy. So I can't really imagine what that anxiety is going to be about going back into a building where there's so much uncertainty about a disease that you can't see. And I think, my final point is ultimately where I am at is voting for something that assures the delivery of education in an equitable fashion for everybody. That's part of our mission. I went to the website, Steve, and I looked at our mission statement, and that's why we're here, is the delivery of education. And we need to adopt something where we can assure that on a consistent basis. If we adopt a plan where we're going to be constantly guessing whether we're in or we're out and things are unpredictable, kids do not do well when life is not predictable. So that's where I'm at. Sorry, it's a little long.
No, that wasn't long at all. Thank you, Rob. Who'd like to go next?
I mean, I'll go. I don't have as much to say as Rob. I think he made a lot of the points that I agree with. So this is the hardest. I mean, one of the really the hardest decisions. You know, I have a son who signed the petition to want to go back, and I hear that, and I have personally a relatively high risk tolerance, but there's a one. I'm concerned about imposing my risk tolerance on other people because I understand the complexity that this illness creates. Some people are going to be asymptomatic, and other people are worried that they could become very, very ill. And you know, we can't just impose our risk tolerance on other people. So we have to be respectful of that. The other thing that I want to explore more, Bridget Christie wrote an email that I found to at least make me think differently about this than I was thinking before. And her email made me think, it's nice to say hybrid. It sounds really good. We're going to send kids back. That's what my kids tell me. That's what their friends tell me. That, you know, that's what parents tell me. Many parents tell me. But her email made me think, will that really work well? Will we really just be embarking on some other thing that we don't know how to do very well, instead of leveraging what we learned in the spring about how to do remote learning and do it better, rather than to start some other thing that might be somewhat half-baked, where we're spending a lot of our day, or the teachers spending a lot of their day making sure students are following all of these rules and protocols. How much teaching will we be really doing in that time? And then what will be happening to the kids who are out? So I haven't resolved these questions, but I will say her email made me think a little bit differently about, oh, it's always better to just have the kids in. That's the best way to teach them. And at least she got me to think that I have more questions to ask the superintendent about what his views are really about that, as a matter not of health and safety, but of just teaching and getting the best outcomes for the students.
Thanks, Seth. Norm,
Yeah,
you're off mute, so I think you want to go next.
Yeah, I'm going to go to that in a second. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who came to our opening ceremony on at Harold Martin for Breaking Ground. It was great to see Dave, Liz, and Jay, and other board members there to celebrate a great time for the district. So thanks for a great ceremony, Jim and Andrea and others who watched it online. It was a great ceremony. Now I'll get to my thought process on yeah, I agree a lot with what, you know, Seth and Rob said. You know, I haven't made up my mind on what I'd like to see. A lot of good questions was proposed to Steve earlier this week that, you know, I need to see answers, you know, to keep our students and teachers safe. And that's really important to me. You know, I have 3 kids in the school, and I always weigh my decisions based on everyone's kid, not just my own. You know, my son also signed that petition, Seth. I had a good talk with him about why he wanted to go back to school. And he says, you know, Dad, I'm in the front lines working to bag people's groceries. You know, I'm an essential employee. I am constantly in the grocery store, you know, doing this and doing that. And I know how to stay safe. And I said, well, there's always that one case that, you know, things could change for anyone. And it weighs a lot on me as a board member that, you know, what could happen with anyone at any given time. But our students, you know, are really miss each other. They miss having that one-on-one interaction with their teachers. They miss the social aspect. And, you know, we do have to look at science. We have to look at many different variables. And, you know, we don't have all the necessary answers tonight, or we might not, I don't know. But I just really wanted to say, you know, Steve worked really hard with the Back to Force team. You know, we worked very hard in many discussions, and it's hard. It's a unique time. I know that this school district is looking for to keep our students safe, our teachers safe, our custodians safe, our nurses safe. And for me as a board member right now, I'm willing to look to see how we can continue to educate our students, how we can continue to keep them safe, and our teachers. I want to make sure the needs of our students are being met. You know, we have a lot of students who need that one-on-one time. And to me, that's very important. But it comes down to, can we keep them safe, bus transportation, and really looking at, you know, a discussion as a board on what is, I don't want to say the risk level. I really think it's important for us to look at what maybe this, I guess risk level is the word. We need to look at what's best for our students, our teachers, and really look at a path forward, potentially to put them back in. But we don't know when the end is on this. And that's something that's very important. We don't know. We don't know how long this is going to go. We don't know how long the cost is going to be. But a lot of people in the community reached out to me, you know, a lot of doctors, a lot of nurses, and it was some great information. They all explained to me, you know, we're at 0 cases and this is the extreme right now, you know, that we are not in school. What is the decision for us to go back into school? And that's something this board needs to decide. I think one thing that's very important to me, and I'll wrap this up, is policy. You know, I'm very, 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 very strict about policy. You know, not everyone in this community agrees that this is a public health crisis. A lot of people do not want to wear a mask, and that's a reflection sometimes on their child. And unfortunately, you know, that's something that weighs very much on me, that if we're going to have a discussion about students potentially not wearing masks, you know, that weighs very heavily on my decision. So that's important that, you know, that's addressed at the forefront, that we have a strict policy on that if we decide to go back, and that we can all agree that, you know, we can go back and there's a mutual understanding to be safe.
Thanks, Norm. Andrea.
All right, I'm up. And I'll make this pretty quick because I'm looking forward to having a more in-depth discussion in a little bit. But when we're talking, not to echo what folks have said, in addition to what a lot of people have already brought up, the things that I would really like to see tonight would be for us to look towards metrics for movement. I think that while it's great that we can listen and take in information, I know that we really need to get to a point where we're making some hard decisions, and we're no longer going to be able to kick the can. And I also want to allow us enough time for whatever decision we do decide on to have the time to be implemented. So what I would love to see tonight would be discussion. I know we're going to talk about the calendar. I would love to talk about when we at least think that we may be approving a plan. I think that date can be helpful for the community. I'd like to revisit or to talk about how often we're going to revisit whatever plan we choose. I think that information would be helpful, because even if we don't have the answers or all of the answers, I think it's helpful to know how often we'll be relooking at things and rehashing them, even if we're just going to say we're going to look at it every 2 weeks. And then, as Norm just alluded to, you know, I really want to look again at some of the harder costs, you know, the actual money that it's going to cost, the safety, our transportation, our access, the ability of our facilities to support any kind of hybrid learning. And then the metrics that we have for moving up or down throughout the year, because this is it's not going to end in November. It's not going to end in January. And so I really feel like having a more holistic view or longer term view can help us also move out of sort of a crisis reactive mentality, even if we have to revisit that down the line. So those are just some things that I am looking forward to talking about tonight.
Thanks. So I think I've spent the last couple nights and mornings reading through a lot of plans put together by other districts, and then a lot of, I mean, there's so much information out about school reopenings. And so anyway, so some of the things that have really stuck with me as I've thought about this and you know, read a lot of the comments that have come in. So the first one is around flexibility, that if we choose a hybrid model, and frankly, that's where I'm leaning towards, and I'll talk a little bit about why, but if that's the direction we go in, I think as Rob said, we need to make sure that, those families and students that don't choose to go into school because they can't, or they choose not to, that, we have a robust distance learning or online curriculum, and they're part of the classroom, and that piece of what we move forward with is as robust as we would be teaching the students in school. And then, for as we open the doors for students to come in, and I know Steve was part of the plan that Steve had put forward last Thursday, but ensuring that the health and safety of everyone in those buildings is paramount. So that that we have a mask policy, that we have adequate cleanings during the day, that our ventilation system is robust and we understand what it's doing, that we are enforcing social distancing. So all those pieces around health and safety are put into place. And that gets into sort of the budget. And so some of it, as I think about a hybrid, some of it is budget dependent. It's actually, a lot of it is budget dependent. Saturday, for me, is a big day in our planning. If we're at a flat budget, that I think we have to reassess, how we do it. Doesn't mean we can't do it. It just means I think our job becomes a little bit harder, knowing that the cuts that we've already put on the table to get to a flat budget. What else do we need to reduce in order to find additional monies for some of these items that we know we're going to have. And then I just think to Andrea's, I think, really good point. To me, there's, I want to be able to present to community, what's our adaptive management plan here? When do we go from a hybrid model to fully in school, like everybody can come in? Like, when do we get to that point? And on the other side, when do we go from a hybrid model to having to switch to online learning completely? And there's a lot of information out there about how to look at that and how to make those decisions. And I think for me, I think that's really important. And I just think about where we are now. Here we are in Hopkinton. We do have 0 cases. We've had 0 cases, active cases, as well as daily cases. We're at 0. In Merrimack County, one of the metrics that is used is how many cases per 100,000 residents you have over the past week, sort of an average. So Merrimack County is right now around 5, which is pretty low. The state of New Hampshire is around 12. A lot of the guidance that I see is, less than 1 case per 100,000 is sort of when you're able to, as they say at Southwest Airlines, move freely around the cockpit. So we're not there. We're not there in Merrimack County, and we're not there in the state of New Hampshire. So it feels to me like getting everybody in school is not really an option. If we got to a place where Merrimack County or the state of New Hampshire was at, less than 1 case per 100,000, I would want us to open up our schools. I understand that there's still a risk associated with it. But, science tells us, and the CDC and a whole host of organizations say that that's a pretty safe environment to be operating in. But we're not there. So where are we? We're sort of in a hybrid model. If you look at, I think it was the Harvard, I can get their name wrong, but there's a Harvard public health group who has like a red, yellow, orange, green type of scenario. In the red scenarios, if you're over 25 cases per 100,000 over the last 7 days, they say go to a fully remote. That's community spread. There's a lot of risk. So to me, it feels like, you follow the metrics and then you make your decision based upon them. But anyway, I'm sort of rambling on, but to Andrea's really good point, I do think having the board agree upon and ask the superintendent to look at what are some of these metrics and what do they mean for our community and what does it mean for our school district? Because then it's a transparent process. It's not based upon, I think that 25 is okay, or I think 25 is too low. It's based upon we can point to something that we're basing our decisions on that's transparent. And so as we adaptively manage, would have a basic basis for that. So hopefully we can get to there. But I do think, my worry, as Rob stated, is just the hybrid model, ensuring that we have enough money, cash on hand, in order to make sure everybody's safe. And because I don't want to go until December and then then we don't have any additional resources to make what we want to make school happen. So I think it's a careful budget management concern as well. So that was helpful. Thank you all. I guess, so I want to see how to facilitate the conversation. So Steve has put a proposal on the table, and I think for our conversation today, where I hope we can end up, it's not where we're going to start, but where I hope we end up, is we really need to provide Steve and his leadership team, the guidance that he needs to put together a next draft and dig into a lot more detail on what that proposal would look like. And so, well, again, I don't think tonight is an action item because we don't really have a plan in order for us to make an action item on tonight. But we need Steve and his team to put together that plan that's going to meet the needs of the schools and the students and the staff. And so I think our job tonight is to provide him that guidance for what are those things that we want to see in that plan, so that he can prepare something, bring it back to us next week. And then, assume there would be additional adjustments that would be made, some additional requests for information. But I do think the leadership team, in order to execute on a plan, needs from us direction on, where we are as a board, and what we want to see included in that. So I'm hoping tonight we can, if not get a consensus from the five of us, at least enough of a focus and enough attention that Steve feels comfortable. And I'm going to keep asking Steve as we go through this evening, is the guidance that we're providing clear enough for him and his team to be able to put the details together to present us with something that hopefully holds together in terms of a back to school plan in a week or so. Does that feel, to the rest of the board members here, does that feel like the right approach?
Yeah, I think this certainly works for me. I also think that this is something that's going on in a lot of districts right now, this process. And I think, sort of as you had said earlier, Jim, at our Tuesday meeting, process can be messy, but it's also necessary. And so I'd be comfortable moving forward with this.
So maybe we can start, because one of the items on our on the list, there's several, but the first one's the calendar. And so I'm wondering if, Steve, you want to walk us through
Sure.
the calendar item, and that could be one that it's going to factor into everything we're going to be putting into a plan. So it's probably a good place to start.
Sure, happy to. Let's see. Trying to find the calendar. Is that the calendar?
No.
How about that one?
That resembles the calendar.
Thank you. So, and we spent some time unpacking this on Tuesday, a little bit last Thursday. So what's coming forward? We originally planned for August 31st, but the state has allowed for 3 student days converted to professional learning days. So with taking that into account and moving 2 professional learning days, the September one and the October one, to up front, then we're looking at a September 14th start date. And what the days would look like, a couple of things, is the PG&S are parent, guardian, student meetings. And the hope there was to have introductions made and just setting expectations and developing that relationship, either in person, small groups, a little bit at the secondary level, because they usually have more, 100 or so students. It would be mini parent open houses explaining and communicating. The professional development calendar to open up is pretty robust, from mask wearing and making sure we have the right corridors to Today we had our first tabletop exercise with the consultant on what happens if a student comes into school, well, about 10:30 has a 101 temperature. And connected with that process is a lot of professional development. It's some facility redesign. It's we want to make sure we have our flow chart and ready in our protocols. So we want to make sure a teacher understands what happens if a student comes and says, I'm really hot or I'm not feeling sick. So those days from the 25th through the 11th is professional development meetings. We have kindergarten placement to do. We have every single student with an IEP has to have a meeting by executive order by the governor. And so there's some structural things, some foundation things. We want teacher time to take a look at the curriculum. Last year, we did a lot of, and if you remember, Jim and the board, we did a lot of end of work last year about curriculum and just taking a look at audits. And then actually, it's based on some of the discussion last week. I met with the task force and we looked at a soft opening for September 10th and 11th, where the first timers, half of kindergartners, half of fourth graders, half of seventh graders, and half of ninth graders would come on the 10th. The other half would come, and we whatever configuration the board works with, we'd start a full on the 14th. The task force has all members of the association. They looked at this, understood the efficacy, the rationale behind this plan, and were in support of this work. So that's now. We still have some embedded days, like someone, Steve, why don't you do something on September 4th? Well, September 4th has been an advertised day off for staff since December when we had the calendar approved. So it's difficult if people have made plans for that weekend I don't know if that makes sense to ask them to change things. So in full transparency, this is a calendar that gets us going. Obviously, as you said, we might have to flip, we might have to change and require some interruption with our consistent program. There's also in September a couple of interesting secondary days where we may have to adjust and be more remote than hybrid if the board decides, because we have PSATs and SATs, which require to test under the conditions of the governor's or the recommended conditions would require almost the entire school to spread out, make sure every student has spacing when we're testing 80 students or 70 students. You're looking at 10 classrooms. In the old days, as Robin would put them in the CAF or put them in the audio or put them in like 3 classrooms. So Chris wanted to make sure that I communicated that we will have to have building specific days this year where before we could incorporate those pretty readily and easily. So what the hope is that with the needs of professional development, the needs of we really do want to have some dry runs. We want to be able to have teaching in small, like we're going to be teaching without cooperative learning in the same sense that the teachers have been trained for years. So pedagogical professional development, health safety professional development, procedural professional development, meetings with parents, and a soft opening would get us to the 14th. And this in itself, so the state has looked at if we had all the student day, one day can be considered social emotional support when we're meeting with parents. So this really doesn't move our end of the year too much. Perhaps one day, because remember, I'm moving 2 PD days into this mix as well. So it doesn't push out to late June, at least if we have this delayed opening. So this is the proposal that the task force looked at and the leadership team looked at very quickly. It was a quick turnaround.
Thanks, Steve. Questions?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions about the soft opening piece. So can you just say which grade levels would be involved in that again, just so I can make sure I get it straight in my head?
Sure. The notion is for students who've never been in that school or in that level of school. So kindergartners never been in, they'll be in for a little bit for their evaluation, but really to provide some time for kindergartners to experience Harold Martin School for the first time. First graders have been there quite a bit. So it'd be kindergartners. So we're looking at half the kindergartners, are you with me, on Thursday? The other half, the day 1, day 2 type approach that Bill and the leadership team talked about. And the same thing, and they talked about this on Tuesday. We weren't able to do the same kind of step-up day. So 4th grade would be divided in half and they'd have the school to themselves. The 4th graders would have the school to themselves. It wouldn't be crowded. We wouldn't worry about the hallways. You could go different directions with that few kids in the school. We'd show them where the bathrooms are and give them a full introduction and some learning. same thing. Our 7th graders, Rob, right, our 6th graders didn't have the step up. They'd have the whole middle school to themselves, and we'd have 9th graders. 9th graders, it's a little bit of more expectations of me because they've been in the school for a little while. But the thing was, it's their first time as high school. We thought it would be valuable to give them a day as well under the new approach to school.
I guess my question, COVID related, is would this be the first time we'd be testing some of our procedures and protocols around COVID? And if it is, does it make more sense to test that with older kids in each building who know the building? So like juniors and seniors, do a test run of what it would look like at Maple with your 6th graders, at Harold with your 3rd graders. So kids that are more mature for their age level and know the building and just focus on, do all of these procedures work with kids that it's not new to?
Sure. And yes, right now the 10th, 11th will be the first days that we try out procedures with students. I do think we'd have, I think we would start making sure our isolation rooms worked and our procedures. I think we do some dry runs, but yes. And happy to, Rob, bring that. We had I've specifically charged our administrators and our social emotional, our school counseling staff to take a look at about this soft opening approach. And happy to get more feedback, Rob, on the other approach where we practice a new piece with kids who don't have that new orientation experience. I'm not fixed on any of this. I do think a gradual incremental rollout in some manner takes a little bit pressure off as we get used to it. So if it's, and to be honest, I didn't give it much thought. As you know, Rob, I'm a 7th grader guy. I'm used to the younger kids, but happy to look at that and talk to Jeff and Danielle and Jackie and Laura and Beth Stern about that approach. And I appreciate you bringing up a different approach, but a soft opening at something on 10, 11 is what we're looking at.
Thank you.
But no, thank you.
Other questions on the calendar? Steve, I have one. It's not, I guess, well, it's COVID related, I guess. If we have a snow day, which I know you hate, but if we have a snow day, can we use I assume we can, but if we had a snow day, we can have kids come to school. Could we use that fully remote learning to count as a school day?
Yes.
Okay.
And,
I assume so.
There used to be significant guidelines about the blizzard bags. I remember that was the approach, blizzard bags, but they lifted those guidelines now, and they do expect, I think eventually when we get back to that normal, they do expect the ability to pivot, and especially when we get all our devices going and we have full implementation. Jim, I think you're right on. I'm saddened by that, but no, I'm just kidding. Snow days aren't my favorite. So so when I do look at the end of the year, I think we'll be able to manage snow days pretty well with our ability. And Chris is going to have to do honestly a full remote day on SAT day. Just because to have 80 kids and 15 staff or 17 staff proctor, it just changes everything. And that's not a judgment about my plan, a plan, it's just the practical implementation about having that kind of resources or facility occupied.
It's a great point, Jim. You may just have some kids be upset they can't make a snowman. But Steve, my biggest concern would be we would make sure that we allocated. I know we bought enough Chromebooks for our students. We'd have to make sure we're meeting the needs of the students that maybe below 3rd grade. We talked about maybe allocating enough Chromebooks to them before we say, hey, snow day remote, and then there's some students that don't have access. So we make sure.
In just the blizzard bag experience is not necessarily technologically based. We're talking, you can have a synchronous or asynchronous learning experience where students go for walks, and do outside activities, inside activities. So a snow day is it can be done without the technology piece. And districts have done it long before one-on-one initiatives.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
That. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yep. So that's the calendar piece. I do expect it may very well change again, not the start date, but as we get going and depending on how we pivot, or as Jim, what you alluded to, the matrix, we may have to do some adjusting of the calendar as we move forward.
Yeah, this is sort of an appropriate time, but not exactly. Maybe related to snow days, you'd have to rename it. We talked about the rooms and temperature and just, you can't teach upstairs on the 4th and 5th floor, and even throughout the building when it gets to a certain temperature and a certain humidity. If we're not able to do some type of climate control in those rooms, could you foresee having Black Flag days, whatever you want to call them? It's too hot and we're going to go all remote because we just can't expect people to wear masks when it's that temperature and that dew point.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to Michelle, who's done a lot of research calling other districts with just with more experience in the facility department. And we've heard it at meetings, air conditioning is not prescribed for this type of work. So we're talking about exhaust fans in the rooms. A superintendent in the year he retired called a Sunday. It was too hot to learn, and called no school in September. And I think you can do that when you're retiring that year. But Rob, I think that's a great point. I think if we did have one of those days, it is a concern. As you and I've been in that 4th, 5th floor, and I asked Amy and Bill, and they had similar experiences at different spaces in their rooms where it may be in fact too hot, too humid with masks and with a number of kids, that it's contraindicating to a successful, effective learning day. So I think you're right on. But we will try to get some exhaust fans as much as we can to do the best we can to make it a good learning environment.
I think that's such a great point, Rob. And I'm just thinking about, the format of the plan, that you had proposed. And that feels like something when we think about like communications, that should be, something that we ought to think about putting in there, that there may be, it may be the too hot day, or it could be like the SAT. That would probably, I'm sure that'd be scheduled in advance, but that'd just be something we want to make sure that parents know that will be communicated, that there may be a change of schedule depending on, these type of factors. And when that happens, we'll be doing either remote learning, or something similar to that, but working that into the plan. 'Cause I do think those are really important considerations, and we don't want, we don't want kids trying to learn in those classrooms when it's that hot and there's no relief that we can offer.
Totally, thank you. I look forward to adding that and taking a look at that and talking to the leadership team about that. Because, and I've got Michelle, the SAU office is pretty hot, and it is hard to mask. It's different. I just say it's different.
Other thoughts on the schedule or calendar as presented?
Can you scroll it up, Steve, so we can see the rest of?
Yeah, there wasn't, honestly, Rob, there wasn't much that changed after the October 31. I did move the 9th, but we didn't touch this stuff till TBD. We weren't, obviously the election, we weren't planning on anyway.
Got it. Thank you.
Is that okay?
So this is an action item for this evening, knowing that I wouldn't say the starting date. If we set this, I don't think the start date would be different. I think the 14th would be, the start of school, what that would look like. I could see, some of the descriptions Steve used to describe like what a soft opening would be. Some of those descriptors may change for what we hope to accomplish, but the hope would be that, the calendar, sort of the dates that are being set aside are going to be used for those purposes. So at least the community can prepare, for when things will start.
Steve,
and I'll bring back next week look at the soft opening in other configurations as well, and determine what's best for kids after talking with folks.
Steve, what's the couple of our surrounding districts? What date did they decide to go on? Just
a lot moved to the 8th, and some did move to the 14th.
Okay. Thank you.
But we're really starting. I mean, in essence, people are working with kids and parents on the 3rd of September.
Right.
I think.
Yep.
Yeah, 2nd, 3rd. So.
Yep, that's where we're going to start the parent meetings and try and develop those relationships and connecting with kids.
Yeah.
So this is an action item. If there's no other conversation, I don't mind doing that action item now, so we don't have to wait to the end of the meeting. Is there any objection to that? All right, so is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the revised 2020-2021 calendar as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All right, seeing and hearing none. Andrew jumped off mute, so we'll start with Andrea.
I did, I was ready. Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
Seth? Seth, you're muted. I could read your lips though.
That's a frame, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. So the calendar has been approved as presented. Steve, thanks for continuing to work on that, over the next couple of weeks. But I do think it's good for the community to know the intention. So the next item for board discussion is the change in instructional approach in a matrix. So Steve, I'm gonna hand it over to you for this one.
Sure, and I appreciated, Jim, your introduction to. So I spent a lot of time looking at decision-making metrics and looking at the Harvard piece and some others. As we continue to develop this, and there's really two components. There's the spread of COVID with positive testing and that piece, but there's also many districts are putting in their matrix staff availability, even bus driver availability. For us, because we're first student, like some districts, if you lose 3 bus drivers, you can't run school that day. But for us, we do have a little bit of a deeper bench for our bus drivers because we work with first students and they're a massive regional company. But as we start developing, as you know, we talked today, we have the beginnings of an iteration of a matrix. If we do adopt the county, and if we do adopt, 25 or 5, or whatever that is, but we also have to look at if 15% of staff are absent, or if 20% of, it is very difficult to run a school with 15% of teachers absent. And there's no judgment about, our teachers are very committed. The culture of teachers, and this is one thing we have to change, is you have to, and Rob knows, you have to be on the deathbed before you don't come into school. And that's got to change. So if we have teachers with symptoms, they can't come in. Kids can't come in. I can't come in. Michelle can't come in, right? That's the culture we have to do because we don't know. So if teachers could absolutely doing the right thing by not coming into work if they have symptoms, that's the right thing. But we have to start looking at how can we run a school if we have 10 or 15%. As I said the other day, we had 27 subs on our list, right? Just our call list. 4 said they would come back. 3 said they're thinking about it. And one of our subs, who is our most dependable, comes every day, is January. He's waiting to see what happens in January. So that's losing one of our most dependable subs that we have. So as we continue to develop this, and Andrea and Jim, I really did appreciate the conversation we had earlier about this, but can we look at, yes, if we're going to do county and we're going to do the numbers of positive, can we also look at what other districts are doing too, is looking at a staff percentage without judgment and without, tone. It's just, there's a reality of how you run a school. If Amy walks in and 7 teachers are out that day, a remote day would be better. I mean, I'm not saying remote meetings or days are better every day, but if they ask the superintendent to come over to teach 5th grade science, it would be better if they had that 5th grade science remotely. Math I could probably handle, but the 5th grade science is out of my league. So as next week, and if you and Andrew and I get some time to work on this together, if we can add that component, the staff availability, along with our virus contagion spread, I think that's a good, realistic, predictable, at least proactive and transparent way to take a look at how we're going to make our decisions. Does that make sense?
What about cases in town itself? The cases within the school?
So, one district plan had 4 cases in district. You're out for 2. Well, and it's Rob. Some of it's kind of funky because some districts are one building districts.
Right.
But so if we had 4 cases in a building, 2 weeks, boom. That's what that you're going remote for 2 weeks, and because it's so widespread. And I think, I'll be honest, I can just tell you that was one district's plan. And so originally, in the calls that I'm on with the state, is they really do want to support superintendents in making that decision. And I didn't, but so we were communicated. If you get a positive, we'll work with you. And if there's some community spread, we'll work with you. But that's not very transparent to the community. So I get that. But I think, Rob, we're going to have to make a decision how much is in the community, in the county, and in our schools, and how many days. And we talked about this in our walkthrough with our consultant. If we had 2 students in one class, if it's pretty well cohorted, maybe we go remote for that one class. But if we're not, then we talked about buses, and we talked about siblings, and we talked about what if it's a teacher. So it's very complicated. But yes, Rob, I think how wide community spread is, and our goal is always to limit that, right? And to keep it as tight as we can.
So you're really talking about 3 categories: the regional data, staff availability, and cases in district.
How's that sound to you?
That sounds good to me.
Yeah,
in terms
I think
of a
so.
metric.
And Steve, when you talk about staff availability, I completely understand the concept, I guess, but are you thinking about creating a matrix for each school? How many staff could be absent in each school, or is it because if again, if you have a science teacher out, you not have a sub. So I guess I'm wondering how that staffing model works, or is it really a numbers game? Or is it more specialized than that, if that makes sense?
But I think by school is right. I think by school it works because we do, at least we can start out, does by school work because we do have some subs that work, pretty tight with schools. And again, that's why I said sometimes I look at a district, it's one building, so they don't, it doesn't really apply to us. But the number that I've seen mostly for adding the staff availability is something like 15%. And for a number of days, if you have one day, you can survive it, but multiple days in a row, and Rob knows this, if kids with sub after sub after sub, it changes the entire culture of the piece. So and we'll talk with leadership, but I think by school, and I will talk with them about the numbers. In the past, there was a culture of covering for each other, but that people are going to be less comfortable now because of the interactions with different cohorts and different kids. In the old days, I used to walk down the hall and get, Rob, will you cover this class? And again, no judgment. I think staff are going to be more centrally focused so they can continue to work as opposed to enter in other groups. So those 3 categories, and I'll take a look with the team about but my gut says by building.
And to Norm's earlier point, I mean, I think that works really well. Maybe not really well, that's the wrong statement, but that will work well for 4th through 12th because we'll have one-on-one Chromebooks, and so if Maple Street didn't have enough teachers, they could go remote and probably make do with that day remote. But it's really for Harold Martin and how you sort of how you do that for Harold if you had to take that initiative to close the building because not enough staff. Like how do we handle that in terms of their day education? Because we may not have all the printed materials in their hands because they've been kind of coming in. So anyway, it's just something for you guys.
Yes.
As you think about this, what do you do in that instance?
And one of the questions that we've had, and it's so if you are just a piece of the remote approach, but then we go all remote, do you drop back in with the grade or your multi-age? This is a very complex piece, but how we, and Bill, the scenario we ran through today with the consultant as a leadership with our nurses was a 2nd grader at 10:30 had 101 temperature. And then what if they have a sibling, right? And how long are they, and how do we get them home, and how do we isolate them? And then what about their class? What about their bus? It's very interesting how, but the pivoting to remote at Harold, you're right, is because it's more resource-based than just technology-based. So that team is going to have some alternate plans ready to go. Because then we talked about Friday afternoon, we get the positive test back. And DHHS, now all weekend, DHHS is calling parents about a youngster in your cohort was identified. And now what if, my youngster has had symptoms all weekend. And then on Monday we pivot. It's a very interesting transgression of steps. And that's the calendar we really committed as a professional development. And we need to have a response team in each building so we can look at, the DHHS might need a printout of every phone number of everyone in Steve Chamberlain's second grade. And then we have to have assigned seats on the bus, because what if this person sat next to 4 kids on the bus? And so that's how in depth it goes. And one of the things, if we go to a district-wide hybrid, the question came up is a nurse is critical during these times. What if a nurse is out for 2 weeks on quarantine? In the original model, and I think Andrea brought this up, a nurse from another school, because they were a much less, it was a 25%-ish, could slide over. But now, and we don't have it, nurses are hot commodities. So anyway, I apologize for joining on, but these are all the scenarios that we're starting to work with as a leadership team, trying to get ready, and we'll utilize the time very well, just so you know.
Oh, go ahead, Rob. Sorry.
Yes. So the tagline here says change in instructional approach. We've talked about decision-making matrix. Can you talk a little bit about the commitment to synchronous, live, face-to-face teaching across buildings, and what expectations might be?
And our school design teams are working as we speak. A couple of the nuances are, and how we're going to, when we get the full hybrid. So we want hybrid options, but we also need remote options, right? And those aren't necessarily, so some kids, if we go 50% on Monday and 50% on Tuesday, some youngsters won't be comfortable or able to, because immunocompromised conditions won't become able to come either of those days. So there's a remote option. Now, what some schools are doing, just live broadcasting of your class. And that has some great positives, but it also has some concerns. And then some are doing, they have enough, if the staff works out really well, you have 3 in-person teachers. While you have a teacher who has asked for an accommodation to teach remotely, they now lead the remote option for those youngsters. And if it's great, if the math worked out really well, 20 youngsters in every class. The design teams are looking at those options. And we're working with teachers to see how comfortable they are with the live, broadcasting of it, or if we want to give 10 people in English 9 to the remote teacher. And so then you have the hybrid is in class, out of class, but it's not remote. And the remote is a separate group of students with a parallel but a different educational experience. And my hope is that on Thursday we'll be able to really put forth what is projected, because we're also doing some staff work. We did start collecting just how many staff are eligible for federally. Remember, this is a federal law with a medical condition that gives them the ability to have accommodations. So those are all the pieces to the instructional model. And our schools are working on this, and very collaboratively too. We're just trying to make sure people are comfortable. It's hard to teach kids. It's hard to teach kids with masks. It's hard to teach kids with masks in your room and 10 kids at home. And they're on camera all the time. And if you're expected to monitor them, it's just a very challenging thing. So we may be able to look at a separate but equal, as opposed to simultaneous. But those are all the things that are close to being finalized with our design teams.
Thank you.
Steve, aside, and you just named a few, because I was going to ask you what's the challenges associated with sort of, the synchronous education, and you named a few, sort of like, it's hard to teach kids. And so it's hard to teach kids when you're not in the classroom. And I totally understand that. But are there other things are there other challenges that I'm just not getting associated with, sort of teaching live to a room full of kids, and then also to an online group that I'm not getting for some reason?
I think, well, let's say I was a math teacher for a few years, and I had some great days, and I had some days that probably aren't so great. And what if that aren't so great day was now taped and was now on Facebook all over the world, that Mr. Chairman was salty, or it was a little spicy. And that would never happen, of course, but there is that concern. Or I was trying to do a literary sarcasm as a literary event, but it was cut and split, it's cut and put up and said, oh, Mr. Chandler's the meanest guy in the world. And all of a sudden that's everywhere. And that's it's just more pressure. When you have kids there. So, and I'm not forecasting that, and I'm not trying to be over, but there's a lot of pressure to be on. And I'll be, Rob knows we were teachers together. I'm glad some days parents weren't able to watch my work. Now, some days I wish they watched my work very well, because you know what I mean? So some of it is how comfortable you are. Some of it is managing the media. Some of it is assessment, in two different areas, the youngsters here, youngsters at home, assessment, because we want true feedback to support, to make our educational decisions. So all those go into, and as I think Bridget talked about, just the discomfort of teaching in this new environment where you're worried about social distancing and you're worried about, this is a huge challenge for administrators and as well as teachers.
That's helpful. Thank you.
What about, as a part of that, concerns privacy with student behavior? So I'm teaching half my classes is somewhere else and half is there, and little Stevie Chamberlain is acting up in the back room, and I've got to deal with that in some way, shape, or form. But do we have issues with privacy? Like, do we have concerns there?
Sure, and how these are being addressed. It is against, so a student in theory cannot tape anything without we're dual consent, right? So we can broadcast, but there actually is statute saying you can't tape, but I'm just, so that's there. The other piece is, and what another district is doing, and I suspect many will, before every class, you announce to the kids in the room and online, there is no expectation of privacy. If you have an expectation of privacy, you need to log out and we need to do something else, because there is with this model of simultaneous, or there is no expectation. You can't have that. Rob, you are exactly correct. That if we have 7 kids in the room and 7 kids at home, if someone starts flipping, they turn that Chromebook and all of a sudden you are on. And so parents have to understand and kids have to understand this is not a private classroom experience that they had September of 2019. And even, we tried to work really hard on having phones, left at other places. So we did. And I'll be honest, sometimes they did tape, right? They turn things on, but now it's much different because you really can't tell, because they literally are on their device. So we have to be clear with parents, guardians, students, and teachers. There is no expectation of privacy in this model. It would be disingenuous to say that this is privacy. We could not hold them to that standard. So a declaration at the beginning of class is some advice of counsel to make sure that's clear every time.
Thank you.
Just jumping in, I just wanted to back up just a little bit, and then I had a couple of questions. I know we were talking a lot about a matrix. I don't know if we really explained what that is or what that looks like. So just sort of to give folks an overview, basically it's a decision-making flow chart. It would also be something that I would hope would be available to the community. So folks would be easily able to see where we were at and the reason why we were moving up or down a level based on, kind of what we've described thus far: staffing, COVID spread within the county, if that's what we choose to do, and cases in district. So I just wanted to give that overview for folks so that we have a shared understanding of what a matrix is. I had a question when we were talking about a teacher in the hybrid version getting sick. Would that, or not necessarily getting sick, but having symptoms, that teacher would then be able to teach remotely. So the sub would be basically at that point kind of doing classroom management, correct? So they wouldn't have to create like a sub plan if they weren't sick.
Sure. So it depends. If the teacher, and this was our second scenario, we just didn't have time, so we'll come back to it. If a teacher exhibits symptoms, then then they're isolated and they go home, and then the 12 kids left in class, assuming that we don't have a positive test yet, because if the teacher was positive, then we might have to send all those students to isolation as well. But if assuming that that it was didn't have a positive test yet, yes, a second adult in the room would supervise the students while the instruction was coming remotely, as long as that teacher was healthy enough to do that remotely.
So if you have a teacher who goes home and you are unsure, the children just remain, and until you know, that would be the procedure.
Right now, that's what we've talked about, that they go isolation, and then we wait to see for a positive. But because the hope is that there'd be 6-foot distance between the teacher and the students, there'd be a mask, right? And so they'd be doing all those precautions. But then if a positive test came up, and then we work with DHHS to inform and expand the circle and all that.
Okay.
And right
Steve,
now,
just on that. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's been moved from we found out today it's moved from a 14-day to a 10-day isolation.
And this is an HR question, but so if we have a teacher who tests positive or goes home, can we expect them to work? I mean, I guess, they may not be feeling so bad, but is that an expectation that we could have of that teacher, that they either have COVID but they can still teach even if it's remotely? I mean, is that a fair expectation from the district to have of a teacher who is, and I don't know the answer to it, and so it's more of just an HR question, I guess. And can we expect that to be like a norm?
It's a great question, and I think most teachers, if they're able to work from, healthy enough to work, they would not want to draw on either the COVID, the family care's COVID time, or their sick time, or their leave. So if they could work, most teachers would want to, put off the use of their sick time or their accrual. But you're right. If you're sick, you're sick. And if you're sick, it's not I agree. I don't think we can expect them. I don't know if we can mandate it either. If they do, right, if they go home and don't work, then they have their accrued time. Yeah,
it's probably the mandate more than because and that's more what I'm thinking. Like, is it something that we can say, you're not that sick, so you should be working? I wonder how that works, because it's sort of a new world. Because normally you get sick and you go home until you're better, and then you come back. But in the case of COVID, you're not coming back for 10 days. No, even if you're systematic. And so can we mandate that teacher to teach? And that would it'd be good for your matrix, because I do think that would be a factor, because I'm not sure that we could force someone to teach if they're out on some sort of leave.
Right, making that distinction in the staffing piece, that it's not just home, it's unable to work, or thank you.
So anything else on the minds of board members on just sort of this idea of a matrix, and sort of how we do, how we think about the instructional model and the resources we have as Steve puts this together?
What we kind of looked at is a 100% in, 50% in. The plan that was presented last Thursday, a week ago, was about a 25% in 4 through 12 and a 50% in K3, P3, and then a 0% in. Some variation of those 4 levels, depending on comfort level. And then the 3 areas: local, county, and teacher staff availability, something like that.
So, Steve, in terms of the staffing availability, and teacher is ill, is home, or sent home, whatever it might be, and perhaps still teaching, do we have enough instructional assistants? And is that part of your matrix to what the break point is? And do we have a sense of, I know that, there were instructional assistants over the years who were quite comfortable taking over the classroom, and there are others that would prefer not to do that piece. They were more comfortable in a one-on-one environment. I'm just curious how those numbers play out, and I would think that would have to be part of that matrix as well.
Without question, as the school design teams are organizing and projecting their design plans, the HR side now is evaluating all the teacher requests to see how many require under ADA to work remotely, because we have a teacher teaching remotely, and I think it can be effective with that second adult. But as there aren't many, if any, second adults instructional assistants that weren't really responsible for very specific kids for their very specific needs. So it's going to be we've talked about a different approach where, as someone, there may be times where a library media assistant is actually supporting, being that second adult in that room, or the one adult in as a second adult remotely. But as I talked about last week, there's a lot of areas that may make it difficult to function in a hybrid because of staffing and because of, as you just talked about, Rob, the heat in the custodial areas. But I think we need to look deeper at it and take it. And we started, Michelle, Lori, and I started on, was it Wednesday, Michelle? I forget, our days run together. We started the evaluation process of each request under the legal requirements. And we're working through that. And I'm hoping to have more information next Thursday as we continue to progress through that part of our human resource duties.
I got one of the common high school questions was, what about a lab? Labs and things like that. And I'm thinking about students moving around classrooms and doing activities or sitting in groups. I mean, I just want to understand, I think we're going back and it's going to be all the things we want. And is that right? Or are some of these things just not going to be possible with all the distancing that you require?
It's a great question, Seth. And so a couple of different ways that I think, if we are in the 50% area, so we're talking in a chemistry class, say it's 9 kids, so we want to keep the 6-foot piece. So does Stein have some kids do a lab independently one day and then the next day, they switch, because it is different. Now, Stein has done a lot of video labs, and we're looking at subscription to online labs. And I've seen myself, one of the first VLAX classes we had was AP biology, where they had dissected a cat, virtually. So it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be 4 kids around a Bunsen burner real close to each other trying to measure and figure it out. I think I can say that. I'm not Stein, and I don't want to pretend to be, but to keep the guidelines that we want, even if it's 3 to 6 feet, it's not 4 kids around the Bunsen burner measuring and taking a picture, looking at the color of the flame. I spent some time in John Meyer's class last year, and there were kids so excited to be close to it. It's going to be different. Right.
And then in 4th and 5th grade, I picture kids doing things, together. And I just want to make sure we're not overselling. That I think it's great to have the kids in school, but I just want to make sure there are going to be limitations, I take it.
And that's in my work with other districts, that's pretty uniform. It is going to be 6 feet apart in rows. It's not going to be collaborative and cooperative learning. Those are the guidelines that we're seeing. Now, some, to be honest, are looking at moving it to the 3 feet. Some districts, I'll be honest with you, Seth, some went to the bottom of that span. We're trying to keep the top, because in my experience, 6 becomes 3, 3 becomes 0. But yes, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
Any other questions at this point? This is a lot to take in, and I know it's a lot for Steve to be thinking about putting together as well. Steve, I'm sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to express my appreciation. I know that this is a lot of work, but I do think, kind of similar to the flat budget exercise that we did several weeks ago, I think being able to really walk through this stuff is incredibly helpful. So thank you, very much for being willing and open to looking at some other options and some other models. I appreciate it.
No, and absolutely. Everything I've ever brought to a Hopkinton School Board gets better because of the Hopkinton School Board. It has been that way for my time, and I've always appreciated that. It's been a challenge, and Jim knows, I talked to him quite a bit. It's been a challenge to manage with Michelle and the team, the facility project, the back to school project, and the budget. And I'm not trying to whine, and I'm really not trying to do it, but those, when I look at some of my neighbors, without a facility project, they've already had their budget, and they're focusing 100% of their time on the back to school plan, even though I don't think it's that far ahead than ours, because a lot of districts are rethinking, to be full transparency. But I understand the community's frustration that why wasn't this done sooner? but it's been a significant challenge this summer to manage all those things and keep the trains running. And I hope this doesn't, my intent is not to whine about it. It's just, this is the conditions that, and we'll, and as a, one of the long community members I've known for 21 years emailed me and said, Steve, it will, the budget will be over on Saturday. So
You can click that, check that box off.
yes.
No, I don't think it's whining at all. It's reality, and I mean, I guess we can complain about reality, but it is reality. So we're stating. So you mentioned nurses are in high demand, which I can understand why. I'm just curious, you know, as we think about staffing and as we're having, you know, looking at matrix that involve that and substitute teachers, like what is the? I guess I make an assumption that the educational professionals are in high demand right now as well. That if we had to go onto the market to try to secure, you know, additional IAs or support staff, I'm just sort of curious what you're seeing or what you hear, sort of, you know, how easy is it to hire to fill some of these slots if the needs arise that we had to? Just sort of curious.
Sure. Next week, you'll get a resignation from one of our instructional assistants, and Bill's worried. He's already tried to contact his pool of college youngsters to come in. That's been a good, you know, a pool for us. I don't have any expectation that in many of our areas, if we could staff. My son, some people know my son is becoming a math teacher. So sometimes I look and say, oh, if he was looking right now, honey, there's a lot of opportunities and I was a math teacher too. And yes, sometimes I look too. I'm just kidding. But like we could not, there's no data that says we could hire a math teacher right now. There's too many positions open right now at other districts that, you know, so I am worried about staffing. It's August 13th and without a budget, but yeah, the nurses especially in something like this, we rely on our nurses for the medical procedure expertise. You know, when we were, it was funny, Bill and I, when we last, if you remember in the spring, we had someone in our educational community was tested positive. Well, our nurse Sheila ran all the DHHS, all the protocols. She was the point person and worked with us. So if we lose a nurse, that's just really hard because they really are trained for this type, not just the gearing up, but the health procedures on how you work with kids. So it is a concern. And if staff decide to, you know, make a different choice, it is a concern.
Well, that's helpful to know. I mean, it's good to know. I don't know if it's helpful to know, but it's good to know. You know, again, as we think through a lot of these things, like what options we have available to us as we think about the staffing piece. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of outside assistance that we can look at, but it's good to know.
Steve, can we be open if we don't have a nurse in the building and we were in hybrid?
You know, boy, that would make me uncomfortable, Rob. I'd have to, I'll talk with her. It would make me very uncomfortable. I think it would make our building principals very uncomfortable to handle the level of PPE and the level of protection. You know, we had talked about today. So if we had at Harold, we have Jean, who's a new nurse. If we had 3 people who came down to the nurse's office with symptoms, you know, Bill, the principal would expect to be number 2. Well, he's got a full gown now. He's got to go mask. He's got to go shield. He's got to go gloves, and he's got to go gown. And honestly, we have to learn how to do that, you know, to gear up in a sanitized way and gear down in a sanitized way. So Rob, that's a great question. And Amy and Nicole and Jean would advise me on that, but it would be very difficult because if we had to handle 2 or even 1 COVID-related symptoms, and the guidance, and we spent a lot of time on this, the guidance from Dr. Chan is if you have 1, I think, of 11 symptoms, it's go home. And families, I mean, and that's the state guidance.
One thing feels like a lot of liability to not have a nurse in a building.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jim. I hate to say no at the top of my head, but it seems like a challenge to me, Rob, and just to be honest with you.
Steve, one thing you mentioned over and over again in the last meeting was capacity, being able to have everybody be safe. You know, in this new instructional approach, will you be able to determine whether or not we'll be able to have a hybrid potentially and be not having a facilities issue with keeping people safe?
Yeah, that's what we're planning for right now. We've got the design team planning for it. We'll develop. We're going to look at the human resource component about staffing. We're going to look at a decision matrix and where we are with all this. So we are moving forward and trying to see if we can. And perhaps, my original plan was about 25%, and I've certainly heard from the community, and maybe that was too conservative. But we are looking at a 50% model. That means much more, a higher increase of space usage, higher dependence on our nursing staff and our full staff, our custodial staff. But we are looking to plan and to see if we can, implement that too. And so that's what we're looking to make that successful.
And the number one thing would be staffing to start with, because that's where you start to make sure you're able to meet the needs of the students. Okay.
Today we had that question at the tabletop exercise. Staffing is certainly big, and then how do we handle the unknown, the variables of two kids, and if it's September 5th, 16th, and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and two staff members and a youngster are demonstrating with symptoms, that's a lot for us. That's all. If everybody's fine, not sick, I like our chances a lot. So. But staffing is there. I know Michelle and I spent a lot of time talking about our custodial cleaning ability, making sure we can do it based on our number of staff, our FTEs. We spent a lot of time on that. In the transportation, we're going to talk about transportation in a minute.
I mean, what is your view of that? I was concerned about the custodial issue because it strikes me that you need a higher, more frequent, deeper clean than we would do in the past, and we are not budgeted to give you more staff. So what is the plan around that?
So Michelle has done a great job in making sure we have the right equipment. The electrostatic cleaners have helped us a lot. We're also making sure we have a strong protocol, practiced all summer for our buildings. But Seth, look you in the eye, it's a concern. Because of the profile and because of what we're at, it's a concern. Our custodians, they want to keep people safe in our building. Please know, they take great pride in that, and they want to make sure that our buildings are clean for everybody. But it will be a challenge.
Keith, could you just review for folks, because I don't think most people know the general makeup of how many custodians are in each building on a typical day? And
sure, and Michelle can help me too, because during the day, Michelle, we have one person during the day at all our schools. At Herald, and we have an additional halftime person for Herald off hours, Michelle?
Right, we do have another halftime, but we haven't filled that position yet because we don't have a budget, and that we haven't just gone down that avenue yet. But yes, so in essence, what's in the budget, that's being presented to the voters, is a 1.0 in essence at night, split between two people.
Gotcha, but only half of it's filled. And then we do the same model at Maple. We have one at night, one at day.
Right.
And they also have to do the SAU. Just so you know, the SAU needs to be cleaned. And then at the high school, one full-time during the day, and then 3 in the maintenance person.
Well, there's 2.5, but then there's the night supervisor that spends a lot of his time at the high school because of square footage, but he does spend time at the other buildings helping with cleanings as well as managing the staff.
And as soon as the budget, we have experience.
And then the other thing is we do have a maintenance worker that obviously does more of the maintenance stuff during the day, but in this kind of a situation, and that's always been what we've said anyways, is if we run into a problem with the custodians being out, that person would have to be more of a custodial person and not a maintenance person.
Does that describe it okay? So we made one of the first things that Michelle did was order electrostatic cleaners at the very beginning of this for all our buildings. And that truly is a better system and a more efficient system.
So why don't we move on to transportation? Because that's, just speaking of all the moving parts that's another biggie, aside from, the staffing and the prevalence of the disease. So Steve, I know you met with the company yesterday, I think.
I did.
Anyway, updates would be great.
Sure. Just to reiterate some of the things we talked about and to confirm, all the bus drivers do a screening before they attend work. Very similar. I mean, they've done it this summer and they do it. So it is the questions. So the standard that we've talked about, if the board would approve, would be one student per seat, except for family members. Family members can be on the same seat. So 24 roughly, but you could go, if you had 3 or 4 family members, and we'd have to have a hard registration just to know where we are on bus usage. Hand sanitizer before students get on the bus. Mask for students on the bus, and this is recommended, and Rob talked about kids being kids. I think from the beginning of time, the favorite seat in the bus is in the back. And but what you want to do is in the past, older kids got the back, young, right, and you loaded that way. But this time you want to load so you don't have to, right, cross people, because so it's assigned seats on the bus would be a challenge, but that's best practice. For bus drivers, they wear masks during loading and unloading, and if they are comfortable while driving. But sometimes masks and shield, they fog up, and as you're driving, that's is obviously contraindicating. But they will be wearing a mask during any times loading and unloading. So next to an open, most districts are 1 per seat next to an open window. Michelle asked the question, can we have the open windows in bad and inclement weather in the winter? And first student has not made a statement about the impact of opening windows in bad weather. I don't know if they're worried about other health things, but I asked him, I said, will these be open all year? And said, we haven't made a statement on that yet, but we're fine right now. Let's see. So the cost for sanitation, it's
Steve, can we go back to the open windows year round? Haven't been the Nordic ski coach and know what a cold bus is like when you got on at 6 a.m. in the morning. If windows are going to be open during the winter on a 45-minute to an hour bus loop, that first kid who get on, that's not a pleasant experience. I think we got problems with that.
I agree, and I think that's where the contract manager is coming from too. I'm with you, Rob. Everybody okay? So the daily so to sanitize the bus daily is twice. It's after the morning run and after the evening run. You with me? And so that is approximately $650 a month. It's about this is average 20 days a month, so it's under $7,000 for the 2 applications of the disinfectant on 8 buses. Now, if we do charters, so if we do some sports, we went, and I know sports we'll talk about next week, but if we took a bus to Bow, then we'd have to sanitize it before, after the run and then after the charter. You with me? And the daily option is, then you only do it, the monthly option. So some districts are choosing just to do it every 30 days. And then you only have to do it once. You don't do it twice on that day. You do it at the end of the 30 days, is about $2,000.
So $7,000 for cleanings after the morning run and after the afternoon run for all the buses.
Yeah, well, those are all the contract buses. And then we have, as you know, we have the fully accessible bus and we have the ambulance. So, we would do those ourselves. We would get the right equipment and our bus drivers would do that before the use. But the cost of our 8 2 school and 2 home buses, under $7,000.
Well, I mean, that sounds like extremely reasonable and something that we ought to, if we're putting a hybrid model together where we're going to be doing that type of busing, then I think we ought to plan for that. If we go in that direction, that doesn't feel, that actually is much cheaper than I thought they were going to bring us back. I shouldn't say that out loud in a public meeting. But
No, it's a good
And
point.
one of the questions, so this money, so we do anticipate certainly less charters, than a full season of every athletic, just already the athletic season, why we can talk about next week, it's already moved to September 8th. So that's 3 weeks of charters already that we wouldn't have had. You with me? So the funds are probably within our transportation budget in some respects. And I don't know if Michelle would kick me under the table if she's okay with that answer. I can't read her facial expression. So, but anyway.
So Steve, go ahead, Andrea. Sorry.
Okay. I just wanted to ask when we're talking about buses and our morning run and afternoon run, a lot of kids, if we were looking at hybrid, a lot of kids take the late bus, from Harold or from the high school and Maple Street over to Harold Martin, or they take the bus from Harold Martin over to Maple Street to go to the Boys and Girls program. And those buses are like full unload and then full reload. So I don't know if you have an answer for this, just or what you guys are thinking about when it comes to like the late bus situation. Because like a parent like me, I've got kids at 2 different schools. I don't know if I can make it in time to get both.
And thank you, Andrea, because this did not look at, and I don't think we'd have to, but right, we do express some students over to Tween School and Home for the after school program, and some kids get on the bus at Harold and end up at Maple for the Boys and Girls Club program. So I think those would continue, but again, with 24 kids on a bus, it's, one of the things that will help us with permission to get a registration out there and find out how many kids are on the bus, because if 500 people, this could break it, but in some districts it's breaking up busing. But families are also, and again, I think I said this on Tuesday, a plan that was sent to me. One school district is really trying to have community help community and look on carpooling and try and do everything we can to, if you can avoid the bus, avoid the bus, because that really helps someone else who can't avoid the bus. I don't know if that made sense, what I just said.
It makes sense. And I think that we've already seen a lot of community support and outpouring and folks, being willing to help each other. So I would really hope that would continue, because I think that's just a real strength that our community has. And I'd love to lean into that.
Steve, a question I had, when I tell my kids to pick up their room and clean their room, they pick up their socks and they say it's picked up, and it's not really picked up. So when they clean the bus, what exactly are they doing to clean the bus? Are they doing the windows, the seats? I mean, what's the details that goes into cleaning?
They're using and they explained this to me, they're using they did a study and they have the best disinfectant supposedly for buses. I mean, of course, that's what they'd say, but there's a specific disinfectant and they wipe down all the seats in high touch areas. I did not get the impression, I can follow up, Norm, that they were doing the windows. My impression was seats and, and the high touch, all the seats where kids put their hands, because where the top and where they put their hands. And I think that was it, because most of them don't touch the door.
Yeah, I guess the windows is my, kids are.
I did not get that impression.
Sticking their face, seeing their friend, making goofy faces. I just want to have a warm, fuzzy feeling that when they get on the bus, we are saying, hey, we've cleaned it, and maybe more of a cost, looking into that. So just something I was thinking.
It was just really described to me as we do all the high touch points and seats, so I can dig in more. But I didn't push back at that answer much. And
then my last question is, and this is is the bus driver cleaning, or is it a separate company?
It's bus driver.
The bus, the driver is actually cleaning.
Yeah, I asked him specifically, and we're using First Student Labor, which is a cheaper rate because they don't have to bring anybody in. First Student Labor, and he said that their bus drivers have been trained and they have the equipment to clean.
All right, so if you the window part, that'd be really great. I appreciate that.
I will do that.
Thank you so much.
Steve, we're looking at about 40% of capacity. If we're assuming we got 500 kids in a day, we're split at 24 kids, that's 192, and 15% stay home. We're about 40 to 45% of the kids coming, we'd be able to carry on a bus.
Love your math, Mr. Nato. I love your math.
Is that, I was doing that just for you. Is that sort of in line with bus ridership now? I mean, I know we haven't done the registration, but just, I don't know how many kids ride buses.
And so I ride a lot of morning buses, and morning buses are pretty full. The afternoon are okay during, as you know, during sports season. Once the sports season ends, they get packed for the middle school. So, and this is kind of connected. If you run middle school sports in the afternoon, then the pressure on the bus is automatically gone as well. But then if we're going to hybrid, then some parents are going to have to give their kids ride to middle school sports at 3 o'clock, right? Because they're not there at the end of the day.
I guess this leads to the question of, if we have more demand than we have capacity, then how do we ration this out?
Great question. And the bus run number, I've asked for an additional bus run number, and I haven't got that yet, but it's not cheap. That is not the $7,000 cleaning bill. Because it's a piece. So I don't. To be completely honest, I haven't thought about that, like the bus lottery.
Well, it might be part of what Andrea was talking about, was if we knew that and reached out to the community and said, the best way you can help us through this is with people that have been around and it's safe and socially distanced. I don't know if you can do that, but if your kids are already playing together, then maybe that could become a carpool, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that nuance. It wasn't the obstacle, but the rationing piece I hadn't connected with yet.
No, and I know you asked to get what the cost would be for another run, but that's going to be important to know too, because a parent may commit to doing carpooling, but it may not be a commitment they can meet every single day. So anyway, I just think we have to have the capacity, because either we're going to help bus kids to school or we're not, and I just think we have to know what we need and what the capacity of those buses are.
And legally, we do not have to bus every student. I think Michelle might be 8th grade. I forget. I haven't looked at it, but there is not a mandatory obligation to bus every student to school. There is for a younger group, but not every. And I haven't looked at that in a while, because we've always been, that hasn't been an issue for us.
No, and one of I don't say I'm saying this because I agree with it. It's just, as I was reading through other districts' plans, and I think Londonderry is the one that's sticking in my head, but they are putting 2 kids in a seat on their bus runs. I don't know if it's every bus run, but that was in their plan. And they walk through recommendations and why they chose that one and rationale. But anyway, I don't mention it to promote it. I only mention it because that's what one school district, and I'm sure there's others, have chosen as a way to meet the needs of students by having 2 kids per seat.
Yes.
And so obviously in this bus model, you are on your bus, right? You are not going to your friend's house by way of the bus, right?
Right. We really do need assigned seats and be ready to do that. So, and again, that's a different type of school.
Right.
Although that brings up a great point though, Seth, because you're going to also have kids who are riding bus 98 Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then bus 93 Tuesday, Thursday, because they're going to different caregivers or
Right.
different caregivers' homes on different days, which will really, this is like
So you need to say
crazy
this,
complicated.
you have to lock the kid. That's my bus on that day, and that's it.
Yep.
Logistics is always the hardest part of anything. This one's pretty tough.
So my homework from this one is the cleaning. Check the cleaning on the windows and ask yet again for the bus run number. Or Michelle probably will, right? We'll do that, right, Michelle? The mouse
Yeah.
in my.
And when do we ask? This is the planning piece or the logistics piece. When do we ask the community the question around the registration on buses? I only ask because some of those numbers don't become real until we get those registration numbers. Like, do we need another bus run? I don't know until we know how many kids need to get on the bus before you can make that decision. So some of it's a little simultaneous planning, but we also don't want to promise everybody a seat on a bus when we don't know if we can afford the buses. So anyway, I just throw that out there. Is like, how are you weighing that? And like, when you start doing these surveys, we also don't want to send out a gazillion surveys over the next couple of weeks.
I know the leadership team is hoping to understand what 50% looks like because we had some survey data that about 15% of our kids wouldn't come back, but yet we know that there might be some other. I know when I look in the eyes of the administration, they would love numbers. So they would like to do this Monday, even if, or at least you develop the survey Monday and get it out in buses. And are you coming? If it's a 50% model, are you coming? And Bill and Matt and Rebecca, those guys are much better at the surveys than me. But it would charge them to get something out so they can work on it and make sure they get the answers they need to develop their hybrid programs. And Michelle gets the number she needs to work on the transportation piece. If that could be an outcome tonight, that we could, not saying this is guaranteed, but if this was this way, would you require transportation, and would you be sending your student to a day 1, day 2 hybrid program?
Yeah, I think it's essential, and so I would be in favor of it. I just think I don't know how we can move beyond Thursday of next week, even if you presented us with like the greatest plan ever, without knowing some of that, right. Because it really wouldn't be. We don't know if we could actually implement it till we get some of these numbers in. Same with you're doing it with the staffing, and so exactly. I do think understanding some of these other factors are going to be important.
And I know they're itching to work together to develop that, and it's really a building level piece because they need the answers for their plans. That's, what I mean? And so I'd like to charge Amy, Chris, Rebecca, Bill to and make sure that we have the logistic components to it, like the transportation piece for us.
One quick question. So if the family says on Monday I need to use the bus, but on Tuesday I don't, is it one or the other, or can they have the option of choosing?
I hope Monday? We can. I'd like to look at the numbers and see. I hope we can. We really do like to say yes and support parents. We really do. We don't relish in this notion. That was like the same discussion about if people start for the first month in the remote, or homeschool, can they jump? I had a couple of questions, Steve. If I homeschool for the first month and it's not working, can we jump in? And we want to say yes. Of course, we want their students in our schools, so we'd like to support them. And logistics, though, if we have 45 kids that need it, it just becomes more complicated. But we'd like to support our parents very much.
I don't want to beat this to death, but I'm going to beat it to death one more time. That I think the 24 on a bus, I'm always kind of curious when the science says 6 feet in a mask, and then all of a sudden it becomes 3 feet. And in this case, it becomes 32 inches. And then lots of assumptions about student behavior. I don't think we're following the best practice in terms of the bus. I don't see how it measures up. I understand that it's logistically the only way to do it to make it practical, but you were all, I'm assuming you were all on buses at some point, and bus behavior is bus behavior, and they're unsupervised because the bus driver is busy. So I just don't want to kid ourselves that this is proper distancing.
Rob, are you saying the 24 to a bus is a proper distance? I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying 24 is not proper distancing.
Oh, I see.
So what would be the number, Rob?
Well, I think that you'd have to go every other seat, which would bring that number down to 12 if you wanted to be at 6 feet. And I know that the point was made that, they're all facing in one direction, but ultimately somebody is getting on that bus, and as they're getting on that bus, they're not facing in one direction. They're facing the people that have already seated. And then they turn and they sit, and there is that approximately 32-inch span back to back. And then you got kids, they're going to turn and chat with their friends and all the rest of it. So
there's no supervision on the bus. So, and
our bus contract manager wanted to be clear. Their job is to drive the bus. And we all went through the protocol. If they see a student take their mask off, they report it to the administration. And if it happens, again, we're talking about not riding the bus, taking the bus piece off. That was our, very quick procedure, what happens. But he wanted to be clear, make sure bus drivers are not looking in the rearview mirror all day. We don't want them looking in the rearview mirror all day. Our manager wanted me to make sure, and we know that. So, and I think, and Michelle would say the guidance at the beginning started 12 kids. I think that's where it started. And then it went to 24. And now you're looking at some doing 2 in a seat.
I think you're right. I think when it started, it was that 11 or 12. We're having a conversation with Dan about that. And this is where I just wonder about where the limitations become a matter of convenience versus what we've been told is best practice, which is that 6 feet. So the horse has now been beaten to death. Sorry.
As I say, I think we had spoke on when we met on Tuesday. Like, it's sometimes the perfect can't be the enemy of the good, and I don't think we can create a perfect plan. And I don't know. I'm not saying that the busing piece is going to be the part that's not perfect, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think we can. I mean, we can't open up a school with children if we're going to have buses with 11 or 12 kids on. I just don't think it's practical. So, I mean, and that could be a choice that we make that makes it so the plan doesn't work. But I just don't think we can have a plan work if we have 12 kids on a bus.
Great.
I mean, unless we ask the community for opt-outs on using the bus, Jim. I mean, that's. I mean. But
yeah, that'd be a pretty dramatic number of students that opt out.
Yeah, I know.
So unless there's anything else on the bus, we have beaten that one to death, and we'll get better information next week. And so the last sort of item, at least on the list, and there may be others we want to bring up, which is the cost of operating in a pandemic. And this is around, the physical supplies, I think is what I see listed here: masks, PPE, cleaning supplies. So Steve, is that something you're prepared to talk about as well, or Michelle?
Sure, and I'll turn it over to Michelle pretty quick. So the notion here is, how do we project? And so Michelle, through the National Association, has found a spreadsheet that sort of does start to look at the costs. But one of the things that we talked about, we don't really know at the attrition rate or the usage rate, until we actually get in school. So we have stores of supplies in this area, but we don't know how many are going to be used every day as we go. Michelle, do you want to speak to the work that you've done in this area and just and your colleagues and all that fun stuff?
Sure. So, it is great, and hopefully other districts, personnels do take advantage of an association for resources, especially being that we're a small district. So I was able to find a document that's an Excel document that kind of, breaks out lots of components, anywhere from PPE to ancillary items, like ancillary being the facility disinfectant items. But the other night when Steve gave the rough number of $40,000, I just want to be clear that that's what we ordered, and it also includes some disinfectant items, because I'm just lumping it all together in one account, so it's very easy to give a number rather than how we've done it in the past, which is by building and actually by area. So like a nurse's item would go in the nurse's area. It's really right now in the facilities area. So I want, because you'll start to see that when you see the quarterly. So in October, you'll see September's quarterly statement. You'll see an account, and it'll have the $40,000 that the board encumbered. I just put it all to that line. Again, just trying to be the most efficient way to be able to give that information to the board. So part of the problem is, like Steve said, this thing says frequency. So how often are masks going to be needed by students and by staff members? And sure, I could go by worst case scenario, but I don't want to be overkill either. So I've started to kind of populate that information with what I know that I've recently purchased for our unit costs. And I put in there like number of kids, number of staff. So I'm starting to fill that out. I feel very comfortable with what we've ordered for what I've known as items we need today for disinfectant and for PPE through the beginning of November. with what we've done. I'll know a little bit more as we start using and getting into the buildings to kind of get the frequency. But if the board wants, I can give, a worst case scenario frequency. I kind of, while I like to be conservative, I think that's kind of ultra conservative because it's not realistic, because I know that staff members necessarily won't need a mask every day because they'll probably have their own mask, but they'll only deal with another mask maybe if something happens to their mask and they don't have another one. But we certainly would be prepared to provide a mask to the staff every day. But, just given that kind of scenario. So I hope that is helpful. And I wish I had more concrete information on that, but without coming up with some guiding principles of what we're going to consider the frequency, either it being that we got to just play it out a little bit to see what the frequency is, or Michelle, you just need to use, X frequency for the situation.
Like even since last week, Michelle has bought NK95 masks for our nurses staff and gowns, and we bought additional supply, but we don't know how often those are going to go, and they're not inexpensive, right? That level of, and nor should it be. But so we're going to monitor that, then she'll be able to project it based on usage. Pretty much after 2 or 3 weeks of school.
And that makes sense, Michelle. Me, when it comes to forecasting out on inventory or something like that, I need to know what I'm using in order to get there. But the key word that I'm really worried about is lead time. So for me, with all these schools opening up, and we're still working on the numbers in order to determine the appropriation based on what you've purchased. Are we going to be in a position where lead time may become an issue with all these schools opening up? That's where I get a little worried that we may
I'm not worried about us opening up, because when I, like an example, the masks, I try to go with the state bids because they've already done this. I'm not going to recreate the wheel, right? And again, we're small shop. So I went to those companies and I said, when can you get masks? This is just one example. I did this on all the things. When can you get them? How much is it? And I was comparing companies to make sure. Have we got everything yet? No. We're supposed to get everything by, I should say the majority of stuff that I ordered like over 2 weeks ago by the end of this week. It was supposed to be the end of last week. So I'm not worried yet. I'm more worried because I was promised that it was going to get here within, a 2-week time frame. I'm more worried about when we get into things. So when we start getting because I don't know how many schools are going to flop the other way, right? Like how many schools now are getting, some feedback. They made a choice of doing all remote, but now they're going to go, so they're going to need some things. And how much we're going to go through it versus they're going to go through it. And I mean, I think it's going to be harder in the winter, like, when we get to November. I just, because we already seen it with our own personal stuff we try to get at the store because of businesses being closed for a period of time, like Lysol wipes, we'll just use an example, things as common as that.
I agree with you. I think what I would propose to the board, maybe to think about is maybe a minimum order requirement. Like once we get to 50%, maybe we automatically reorder and we alleviate any lead time potentially, or if it's 40%, 30%, just when we get to a specific number, we are ordering it, and maybe the board, or Steve, you can determine the right process or procedure for that. I just want to make sure that when we get to a specific level, we're covered. That's just my thoughts.
And that's Michelle has said, walked into my office, I just want to make sure we have the stuff, Steve, that people need almost every day. So we talked about the drawdown and when to replenish.
Okay, good.
And I 100% trust Michelle to monitor with her team to monitor inventory. And as the drawdown goes to go, we don't have a lot of storage right in our district. We want to make sure, and we also don't have a lot of funds. We don't want to outlay if we need to be flexible, pivot with our funds, but And one of the things is we've tried to use FEMA as much as we can for reimbursement. We did do some news that FEMA was only supporting, what was it, Michelle, just the start of school or something like that, as opposed
So
to
I
the
think
run of
they've got
school?
a lot of submissions. And so now they're kind of pulling back a little, and we'll get more clarification on what that really means. Does it, but yes, which was a little disappointing, but not surprising, because I was saying this from the very beginning to Steve, that, some districts I think went a little crazy on what they were purchasing and doing and going after FEMA money. And at some point that FEMA money is just going to run out.
Yeah, you made that point about that with being very specific what you're ordering.
Has there been any communication? I'm assuming the answer is no, but I thought I'd just ask it anyway. Has there been any communication from the state, from DOE or DHHS about any additional CARES money? I know the state's holding on to a bunch that might be that might be sent down to communities for this purpose.
So I haven't heard anything yet. I do know that Monday there's another administrator state call. So I don't know if they're going to come out with something with that. I mean, there is rumor on the street, if you want to call it, that, as their year just ended too, and, all these different components, that there will be more to come. But I've not received anything of that.
I mean,
We did
I was just
get,
say, just so the community knows, we got $40,000 through the CARES Act, which really doesn't go very far when we're talking about this type of equipment and what we need to prepare our school district. So anyway, what that's worth.
I think, Michelle, right, we got noticed that the state is distributing, and I don't know the number, 100,000 masks or something, and they did it 2.5 times your free and reduced lunch rate, and I think we got 140. Does that sound right to you?
I mean, there is some, I don't want to say pushback, but in essence, is that really fair to give it to a district that's not having anybody coming in and they're doing everything remote? So I don't know if they're going to change that or not, but yes, 140 masks.
And those are cloth masks that we can give out
Yeah.
to people. But anyway, so that was the last free stuff we got from the state.
I watched the governor's update on some of the new policies and whatnot today, and he had commented that not many schools have drawn down all of their funds, which, I mean, we're trying to save. We only have a very small amount. So I also encourage us to reach out. They said that reach out if we need it. So I'll take them up.
We have access to the grant application. It's, trying to figure out what are we going to use that grant for. And while what I've already put in for, this grant is unique in that you actually can put in for things you've already bought, where usually you can't do that. And quite honestly, it's been a time thing that Steve and myself are the ones that deal with the grants, for certain ones. And other things have been more a priority, knowing that we do have the ability to go back and just do that, because there's not a lot of resources.
That's good to know, though, that at least that it can be retroactive.
Does that help on that category? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's good to know.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
So those are the items that we've ticked off, the items, at least on the agenda, that we wanted to cover here. Additional items on your lists that you want to talk about in terms of prepping, I guess giving guidance to Steve, Michelle, and his team for prepping for sort of what comes next in terms of a plan for us to dig into more.
Can I just have 2 more cost questions?
Oh yeah, of course you can, Ron.
Steve, you talked about exhaust units of some sort. Any sense as to what that might cost us if we were to do that?
That was literally, I think that was yesterday that Michelle got the guidance from a city. We don't have that yet. That was just yesterday. We did. I said, Michelle, can you find room air conditioners. And then of course that's contraindicated in this.
Right.
So, but we will look into that, but I'm sorry, we don't have that number.
And then I guess just in terms of staffing, extra staffing costs if we get caught. If we were to have a staff person be out for a long time, or can you talk a little bit about what that generally, what's budgeted, and how safe would we be in terms of being able to cover extra costs around bringing in staff to cover for folks who are out? That was a very unclear question.
The long-term sub genre, like we like the maternity leaves and the paternity leaves are long-term.
Yeah.
And Michelle can speak to it. I think, is that an area that you do a 3-year average?
Right, but also you have to take into consideration that the sub rate changed a couple years ago. So it went from, so you have to really look at the days and not the dollar amounts, because it went to $75 a day. So, but yes, that's what we usually do for the teaching staff on that. The IAs, we tend to have some of them, but really it's more of the teaching staff. And the custodians, we use, we usually have a high frequency of either staff leaving and or just subs needed that we use a little bit more than a 3-year average.
Michelle, do you know how much, you can get for the next meeting if you don't, how much we have in the sub area of our budget that we would use?
No, but I can pull that up.
Steve, I asked the question because, part of, in my opening comments, saying that I think part of our job here is to try to figure out how to assure the delivery of education in the most seamless fashion that's not going to be interrupted, and the risk potential to people being out. So if we're going to have lots of folks out, then we're going to be operating on sub plans. We're going to be having people that are not that teacher instructing. So there's sort of the financial cost, but then there's also the educational cost that I think we need to balance in terms of what our risk is if we go to hybrid, and what we might end up having to incur because we did that, and we lose some staff to being out sick or being out with symptoms. So that's the framework of why I'm asking that.
No, I get it. Significant number of subs. I mean, that's the weight. Is that better than the remote piece? I mean, I get that. We're having a consistent delivery of the expert, and I'm with you. I completely get it.
And one thing that I wanted to bring up too is, for next week, if we're going to be looking at the matrix and looking at all these recommendations, is also, if possible, I don't know if Andrew or Seth can speak to it, is the policy for mask. What are we looking at regarding the recommendation from Steve, but also the policy, because it really means a significant risk to the students if people aren't following what are we agreeing to. Would that be multiple readings, Steve, or would that be pretty much just one policy? Okay.
Andrew can speak to it. We met today.
Yeah,
Okay.
so we actually talked about this today, and we looked at a couple of different models, and honestly, part of this was, if we're looking at opening in any kind of situation, and we're talking again about risk and risk management, how much risk are we willing to take when it comes to masks? And through our conversation, really where we landed today, and of course, we'd be open to the board for this, but when looking at sort of the whole picture and balancing everything, where I came down at least was 100% masks all day long. So if you are in school and you are a child of any age, or you are an adult or a visitor, this is what you would need to do. You would need to wear a mask. And if you are unable to wear a mask, 2 things. If you have a medical reason that you cannot wear a mask, we have, a section for that to address that, because that's real. However, if you are just joking around or just choosing not to wear a mask, then you would have to leave the school. You would not be able to be in school until you are ready to return and wear your mask appropriately. And I think, you know, as we're listening and getting all of this feedback from the community, and we're being willing to kind of look at all sides, I think there's going to be some give and take, because I think, you know, the community is also going to need to recognize that as a board, there's only so much risk that we're willing to take on. And so the mask policy right now, kind of as, you know, we've been looking at it, would be masks for everyone. You can have mask breaks. Those would be teacher determined kind of mask breaks. It's not just like, I'm choosing to do a mask break, so I'm taking off my mask. But it's definitely a lower, when you're looking at risk management, it's lower. I would want to be more conservative if we're going to be having more kids in the school, because, you know, we're not just looking at 1 or 2 kids, we're looking at 1,000 kids and all of their families.
So the only
that's where we're at.
As Andrea and I spoke about, we did, so the board does have the authority to waive the 3 readings. I think we did it on a bond policy. Does that sound right?
That's right. Yeah, about a month ago.
So the board does, and because of the start of school, I think Andrea and I did talk about waiving the 3 readings.
Steve, when the policy would be written, when it comes to, I hate to use the word discipline, does the board write that in the policy, or is that the superintendent's responsibility to come up with? Andrea, to a degree, I'm not a big fan of saying, you know, you come back to school and you can wear it properly. You know, I'm at the point where just joking around can lead to severe, you know, issues. Yeah. You know,
typically the consequences of violating a policy is administrative prerogative. So we don't typically, like in the alcohol, it doesn't say what it is.
Yeah.
That's a more of a procedural piece than the policy defines it in the administration. But I mean, you can do whatever you like, but typically it's into the purview of the building administration to manage that. But if there's a violation of policy, it does have to be addressed.
I mean, obviously between 9 and 12, or, you know, maybe from 5th to 12, there's obviously a mature level when it comes to wearing a mask. You know, obviously a first grader, you know, may just not know better or not, you know,
right.
But my point is, you know, when you have these students who want to come back, they want to come back and they want to be in class. And this board says, listen, it's mask. There's no fooling around. If you want to be in school, you're wearing a mask. If not, you're done. You know, I'm not going to the extreme there. What I'm trying to prove a point, Steve, saying that, you know, if our students want to be there and we have a policy in place regarding the safety of our teachers and our students, you know, where is the exception in the level that this board or you guys would have with those students, so they understand the severity of this public health crisis?
Well, and just one of my passion is instruction, and what I've learned is we will instruct, we will work with kids, we will teach kids. But yes, there are some kids that require, you know, but I have great, I think I said this the other night, we're going to need community for this to work. We need family support. We need family support to support this kind of safety precautions. And if you're sick, you stay home. And if you don't come and get them, and we work together. I've and all this stuff. Jim, you probably read it too. That's like the preamble in a lot of plans, right? We need this together.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I was going to say, you know, some of it's on the children, like the children have to wear the mask. But a lot of it is going to be on the parents to reinforce this, and to, you know, to do at home and teach at home and talk about what their responsibilities are in school, because, you know, at some point there has to be discipline, and I think everybody has to know what the consequences are if we set a policy. And I think it's up to the parents to help. I mean, this is all going to work or fail. Not all of it. Much of it will work or fail, you know, depending on the community engagement on this process and helping us along the way. And so this, to me, this is a big one, because like I agree with what Andrea laid out in terms of a mask policy. And I think it'll only work if the community is behind it and parents are helping us enforce it. Otherwise, you know, it won't really work.
It's, you know, and I agree with you, Jim. My point is that, you know, we can ask support from the parents, but there's parents who don't believe in COVID-19. They're out there.
Well, I appreciate that, but I think if they want their child their child to be in school, they're gonna, just like they abide by other policies the school puts forward, they have to abide by this policy.
I agree with you 100%. You know, they have to lead by example, and if they want to attend Hopkinton, mask.
I guess I also just see this really as another point when we talk about, you know, places where the whole thing can come apart. community sport is one of those things where the whole, if we don't have proper transportation, the whole thing falls apart. If we don't have adequate workforce, the whole thing falls apart. If we don't have community support, the whole thing falls apart.
Can I jump in on the disciplinary part of this? So I'm thinking about times when we've tried to enforce or been involved in trying to enforce, whether it's the phone policy or dress code or whatever it happens to be, and we sort of go through the chain of command and whatnot. I think this is one where I would hope that you would write it so that it is at teacher discretion. That this is not something we can have a debate about. If Rob Nato says, it's not a matter, you need to put your mask on and the kid refuses, that's it. It shouldn't go to the vice principal. It shouldn't go to the principal. There shouldn't be a discussion about it. Teachers should have absolute discretion and control about that. I agree with Norm's people's health is on the line here. There's got to be a hard Mendoza line with this. And I think if you want the support of the staff, and we're going to do a hybrid model, we've got to give them control over that part of the puzzle, because that will reduce some anxiety where they can dictate what's happening in their classrooms without worrying about it being turned over at another point in time. I guess my understanding meter on this one would be very low.
Is there anecdotal data on how this is going around the country? Because the one thing that troubles me about all these conversations is we are talking about the ideal student. We present all of this as in this student that I don't know who they are, who's going to sit quietly on the bus, not turn around, not wear a mask, going to wear a mask all day, not get near their friends. And these are the premises on which we're going into this. I mean, anecdotally, do we know that, that worries me, because all these discussions kind of lead us back to the ideal student. And I haven't met them yet in my life.
I've met a few. They're out there, but they're still kids. And there are those that, in my opinion, are going to buck the rules because it is just part of what they do.
I worry about it because frankly, it's uncomfortable. Now, when I get through the supermarket, I am ready to take it off, right? I think we all are. And all five of us, I think, agree. We all should be wearing them. But I think there's kind of a Pollyannish idea here that, oh, yeah, someone takes off their mask, we're going to throw them out of school. This is going to happen. I think we have to.
I'm not suggesting we're going to throw them out of school, but a blatant refusal to put your mask back on should be, you're going to go into the remote environment for X number of days. Period. End of discussion. Teacher gets to make that call.
Seth, I think it's more or less, people who just don't take it serious and they just want to wear their mask up here and not on their face. I mean, it's going to be bluntly obvious is my point. And then that becomes an issue with, students who take it serious and faculty who take it serious, and just that whole environment that we're trying to protect is just my point. There's going to be people who just don't want to wear it because they just don't believe. And that's where I fall in. And to Rob's idea, that's something to discuss at some point with the board, but I just want to have a clear understanding of what the policy will be.
Rob, just to follow up, I think in our subline is about $85,000. And that doesn't include, as you know, we do have a permanent sub position that we haven't filled, again, due to the budget constraints. So there's a little bit more than a full-time sub, but we'll talk more about that after Saturday, because we will have budget knowledge after Saturday. Right.
I also did a little bit of math, just looking quickly at the survey that we already sent out. And we had 824 responses in regards to the transportation piece, because that dead horse is not yet dead. And the folks who said they could not transport their child in the morning or the afternoon, it was 109 out of 824 said that busing would be mandatory in the AM and PM for that. The rest of the folks said, no, my kid doesn't take the bus. 269, my kid drives on their own. So, but it's really that 109 that we would really want to make sure that we're able to support.
You could
Which-
almost get to that number then.
Yeah, I mean, that's 11 and a half kids per bus. So we'll have to cut some kids in half.
You
Well,
go.
look at that math,
Andrea.
Andrea.
Look at you
You're cutting
You
kids in
go.
half and everything.
using the survey. We like it.
So, Rob, you mentioned the Mendoza line, and I didn't know what that was, and I had to look it up. I
Oh.
You didn't know what that was?
I,
Come on.
well, wow. Anyway,
I don't know what it is either.
See,
It's probably
Adding
sport.
below 200. Andrew.
yeah, I
Oh,
think
I
there were a lot of
definitely
Yankee teams that had that problem for a while.
I think the Red Sox are probably there now.
They have
But
it
I
anyway,
think all of them are there now.
All of order.
so is there anything else in terms of? I mean, we've covered a ton of ground here today. More will come clear on Saturday. But is there anything else, I guess, on our minds as we're asking Steve and his leadership team, to kind of keep working and digging into this next iteration of a plan to see about remote if we can get there.
The only other piece I would bring up would be assessments. Kind of what we're doing, how often we're doing them, what sort of assessments we're going to be doing, if they're going to be remote or in person. And I don't have any like specific information that I need on this, but I do think it's really important to figure out beyond our regular summer, whatever you call it, summer slip. We are going to have some catch up to do from last spring. The whole country does. It's not unique to Hopkinton, but I do think that having a piece to address that would be really helpful both for the board as well as for the community to understand.
We had a subcommittee originally started out as assessment because I really wanted to focus on then we went to curriculum instruction and assessment because they want exciting. So Rebecca Gagnon, Deidre Smith, and others are taking a look at that. How can we, and also the state's looking at the state's providing interim assessments, and I think they might be requiring it this year. There's I've heard no one else on the leadership team has heard that was requiring. I was the only one that heard that word requiring. So, but we think they're going to require some interim assessment, but you're right. So we do have a subcommittee of the task force taking a look at that and having some professional development in our preschool time and make sure we're on the same page about assessment because it's a valid, absolutely valid concern. And it helps us know our kids. It helps us, provide the zone of proximal development, if you will, of instruction. So.
Thanks.
So one of the things on my mind, and you're all free to throw rocks at me through your computer screen if you choose to. I'm just curious if because we're scheduled to meet next Thursday, the 20th. I don't know if there's a need or even a desire, and part of this is for Steve as well. Would it be helpful to see for your planning if the board just got together quickly, like on Tuesday, just for an interim conversation? I'm just putting it out there because next Thursday is a long way away, and there could be you could be hitting a brick wall or needing guidance, and so I'm throwing it out there as an idea, not saying we do or don't. I just want to get a temperature of the board to see if we think that would be helpful to you, Steve, as you kind of continue down your road.
Sure. With the expectation that it would be an update and not a final expectation of any of the, like on my list, it's some staffing, it's matrix, it's a survey going out and obviously building the plan. But a check-in point of what are the issues I'd be happy to have. But I don't think I could be in full transparency. The leadership team and I probably couldn't deliver the final product on Tuesday, but we could do
No. Yeah, that was, if I said that, I definitely didn't mean to that. It was more of a check-in. Like, is it helpful to do a check-in for,
I think so.
guidance, but
it's totally up to you guys.
We have a task force meeting. What day next week, Steve? Is it Wednesday?
Wednesday.
So Wednesday, Jim, we're going to probably be wrapping up a little bit with what Steve's for Thursday. I mean, it's probably
Tuesday wouldn't hurt. Even if it's an hour, I mean, or at least scheduling a week. I'm always up to just talking about where we're at and making sure that I'm hitting. We are hitting where you want, but we meet a lot. But it's up to you guys.
Yeah, I'm not looking for more meetings. If it serves, that's all. Because I guess I'm more worried to come into Thursday and you have a big plan, and then
Me too.
we're all like, where'd that come from? So that's I just want to avoid that as well.
Steve, when would you have to post if we were to have a Tuesday meeting? When would that have to be posted by?
Monday. It's 24 hours in advance.
So I guess my thought is if you feel like, and even if it was Wednesday, if you feel like you need it, I mean, I'm opening to meet, but I don't want to schedule a meeting now that we're meeting to meet and you don't feel like you need it. So I would, I mean, I would support at your discretion if you want us to come together, and if that'd be helpful, great. And if you don't.
And Jim and Andrew and I talk quite a bit anyway about various topics. So I can give you an update where we are. Sure. With some consult with Jim and Andrew, happy to see if we think it's valuable, because I too, time is so precious. I'm with you, but thank you. I appreciate your support and willingness to support. So as always, thank you.
All right. Steve, do you feel like you have enough guidance right now on everything we've talked about this evening to sort of keep moving along? Is there anything
I do, as long as in my head, I'm working through staffing, and the matrix are my pieces, of course, the mask policy, and the leadership team will develop a survey, but we're going to get a survey out with a possibility. But I think they would, I know if Amy's usually a listener, she'll listen. She'll be really glad to start. She's a data person. Bill is too, and Chris and Rebecca. So I will ask Bill and the principals to start working on that survey on Monday. But I think collecting some data would be good. And plan and keep planning with this in mind. So I'm hoping that we can deliver a carved out hybrid plan with a remote option, where the staffing piece is and the matrix for our decision making on Thursday, and the mask policy. That's what I look as the general pieces.
And as a part of that, if there are significant obstacles, being able to put out a clear rationale to the community as to why we would go with a remote option. Because I think that's, you know, one of the things that came in some of the questions was that our last meeting, I think people perceived as a big shift from the Thursday meeting. But again, you know, we saw the plan for the first time just prior to that, like a couple hours prior to that. So the last meeting was really to start to ask a lot of questions so we could get to hear. But, you know, to me, Tuesday was about making sure we've turned over every stone in the process to make sure that we either can or can't, and that we can articulate clearly as to why. And that we're not just saying, we think it's easier to do it this way.
I'll certainly give you a status report, what I believe are the key components in our probability of pulling this off, because from the very beginning, a dependable, implementable, consistent piece has really been a guiding principle. I think it's in my little guiding principle piece of the plan, but anyway.
Yeah, thanks.
No problem, thank you. I really appreciate this conversation.
All right, so our last item, because we've done our action item, is for public comment. And so I just want to thank everybody who has, I know this is of high interest, so people are willing to stick it out, but I know it's already almost been 3 hours, so I appreciate those who have hung on and listened to the conversation. But if anybody who is attending the meeting wishes to provide public comment, if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, there should be a raise your hand button. If you press on that, that signals, I guess that's the right word, signals to me that you wish to provide public comment, and then we'll take them in order. And so the first name that has come up is Danae Belt. Thanks for joining. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I just want to first say thank you to everybody who's been working so hard. You guys are doing an amazing job. I love all of the ideas and stuff that you guys talked about tonight, about what I feel are the very realistic things that are going to come up through the school year, with the school buses and whether or not people are wearing their masks, and what happens if people get sick and who's going to follow those people or who's going to cover those people. And I love what Steve said about how, you know, most of the workforce is used to showing up unless they're like super sick. And I've seen that. I've seen the teachers coming in, and I've seen everybody sick, and I'm showing up and doing their best, and like, I'm just going to push through. It's going to be fine. And you know, your kids, you send them to school because you're like, well, it's just a cold, and if I just send them to school every time they have a sniffle, they'd never go to school ever. And so you send them, but this is a different time, and that's what I think is going to be the biggest shift that is occurring with this year. Is every time, you know, when cold and flu season hits and everybody's getting those routine sniffles and sneezes and coughs and sore throat due to postnasal drip and all of that kind of stuff, all of those people have to stay home with this COVID. And so there is going to be, even if we start with a hybrid model, there's going to be a lot of shifting between, okay, now my kid has a cold, so they need to stay home, because I'm not going to go get a COVID test for my kid every time they get a cold personally. So I'm just going to keep them home. And so then that's like the shift back and forth of, you know, like the big influx of kids going to full remote, and then the big influx that, you know, like, and then back and forth, and how, you know, the balance of that. And how do you cover the workforce of, okay, people have a cold and stuff like that. So I just want to say that I so respect all of the hard work that you guys are doing. And, you know, having a going into second and going into eighth grader, like, I can tell you, we did travel to Missouri for our yearly trip to the grandparents. They were able to wear masks for, you know, a 10-hour day flying on planes and going through airports and all of that. But that's with with me pushing it and highly trained, because I'm a nurse, and I'm like, okay, you will wear masks. This is what we do. And, you know, like, they're used to it, but it's still hard. And there are people who are very adamant about not wearing masks. And I think that will be a challenge for everybody. So again, good job, guys. I'm here to support in any way I possibly can, in whatever mode I possibly can. And I just wanted to say I really appreciate everything you guys are doing.
Thank you very much. And for the record, can you just state your full name and your address, if you don't mind?
Yeah, Danae Belt, Clement Hill Road.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining this evening. Appreciate your comment. So next hand that's raised is Catherine Matteo.
Hello.
Good evening. Hi, thanks for joining.
Hi, Catherine Matteo, 108 Park Ave. So I am listening to the 50% capacity hybrid model, and I have 2 kids in the school, one in the high school and one at Maple Street. And I'm really worried about, obviously, teachers having to enforce mandatory mask use all day. I feel like that shouldn't have to be their job. And I think that's going to be really distracting and shouldn't be put on them. You know, having to clean the bus in the AM and then cleaning again in the PM, $7,000 a month, you know, times 9 months, that's like $63,000. Like, where's that coming from?
It was $7,000 in total. I just want to make sure over the course of the year.
Or $2,000 a month to do it just once a month?
No, it was $7,000 to clean the buses and after the runs for the course of the year. Okay. So that was the total cost.
And to do it once a month would be $2,000 for the whole year. Is that correct? Instead of $2,000 a month.
Yeah, I think that's what Steve said. Yeah.
All right. Clarifying that. So, you know, the teachers having to enforce, and then what about paper materials in class? Are there going to be paper handouts? Are teachers going to be collecting papers? I know that sounds silly, but like, is that something that they're not going to do because of the risk of transmitting disease? Are there going to be small groups doing hands-on work together? Is any of that going to happen in an in-class environment?
Yeah, so the guidance that we've recently received from Dr. Chan is that paper, the typical handing of paper and doing paper in class is we've not been discouraged with that practice by state guidelines. Okay. The small groups, though, Catherine, I agree, the small groups will be different.
Okay, so different or not at all, maybe.
Right, yeah.
Probably on the age, right? Okay, that was another question I had. And then I think the first model you guys came out with last Thursday was a really good compromise where you were trying to accommodate those students in grades 4 through 12 that desperately need that in-person learning at the 25% max capacity. Here's like just a really quick rundown of like my fears of doing 50%. Is, you know, the kids that want to go back to school and want things to be normal, it's not going to be normal. When they get back to class, it is not going to be normal. It's not going to be what they want and what they think it's going to be. There's not going to be the socialization, especially with the young kids that they want and need, which is going to basically leave them frustrated and unhappy in a lot of cases. You know, the teacher shortage, I'm really concerned about the teacher shortage. I know trying to find a sub, you know, in a regular school year can be difficult, never mind during a pandemic. If the school doesn't have air conditioning on the 3rd or 4th floor, that's going to be a problem, right? The ventilation, especially in the late fall when it can still be really hot. You know, the kids are probably still going to be doing a lot of screen time, whether they're at home or in the classroom. You know, and what about, you know, teachers that are just like, I can't go. You know, if you have teachers that aren't on board and, you know, or in a high risk pool, I understand that and I empathize with that. And the biggest final thing is we're going to do 50%. There's going to be an infection and we're going to have to go all remote. And parents are going to be scrambling to figure out what to do. So those are my comments. Thank you for the clarification on the buses because I almost had a heart attack when I thought it was $7,000 a month. And then, you know, with all these extra costs and complications that we're looking at with the 50% hybrid model, that's going to end up coming from somewhere else in the budget. Just like you said, like there will be a way to pay for it, but you're going to be taking it from somewhere else in that budget to cover it. And I just pray to God that it doesn't end up coming from instructional programs, right? So we're worried about the effects of remote learning on instructional programs, but does that really matter if we end up robbing instructional programs funds to pay for this stuff, to keep things clean and try and keep people safe and normal? That's my big concern. So thanks for letting me rant, you guys. You have a great night.
Thank you. You too. Appreciate your thoughts. Next is Amanda Gilman. Good evening, Amanda. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you all so very much for taking the time to do all of this first and foremost. And I guess I can't even thank you enough for all of the time and considerable efforts that you're all putting into this. I have several quick points and I'll try to be brief. For me, this is not a question of, this whole concept is not a question of if, but when COVID will return to Hopkinton. So getting our kids into school for a day, a week, or maybe even a month to just meet their teachers and begin to form a relationship, I think is critical to their continued engagement. I think that is what was missing is the engagement the last time. And while they had that relationship with their teachers before, the teachers hadn't quite figured out remote yet. Several of them, some of them nailed it. Some of them maybe not so much. And that's to be expected. But I think that having some time to form a relationship with their teachers, so any time we can get in the classroom is a gift. So I'm wondering if we can all reframe our mindsets to think about opening as just a beginning to the remote framework. I feel certain that we'll go remote at some time. And for me, that engagement for my kids and for many people I talk to, that engagement piece is critical. Next, I'd like to speak to the concepts of mask wearing. And I sent you all an email a few minutes ago with sites screenshot and something from the CDC. The concept of mask wearing is to reduce the spread of COVID in situations where people cannot social distance. So when you cannot be 6 feet apart, you need to wear a mask. That being said, children on a bus are okay to be less than 6 feet apart if they wear a mask. Hence the concept of other school districts where they can put 2 kids in a bus because they're basing it on that concept. 6 feet apart, no masks, less than 6 feet, you can't social distance. Has been shown that masks reduce the spread of spray from conversation and aerosols. So that's a very important thing to grasp when you're thinking about social distancing and how we're going to space our kids, that if you're requiring all kids to wear masks, it changes the scenario. Kids don't have to march down the hall 6 feet apart. They're wearing masks. That being said, your mask policy is absolutely critical, and enforcement of that, yes, that's critical as well. So kudos for jumping right on that. Next, I'm interested in your substitute list. I have a few people in town, so this is a question. What are the qualifications for a substitute teacher?
Love them. Send them to me, Amanda. It's a meeting with me is the qualification of a sub list. So and we do a brief orientation. Yes, we would love to have more subs. So thank you.
Fantastic. And I assumed it was a background check. That's what I told people. I said, I think if you can pass the background check, you're in. Okay.
And meet with me. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you. And then same question for a nurse sub. I have a couple of nurse friends who said they were considering a day or two.
The nurses do the preliminary interview there, and they talk about the procedures, but it's a background check and license and all that fun stuff. But yes,
okay, because
we love that too. We love a list.
If we're proceeding, I think that you could probably use help in beefing up your sub lists. And so that's something I would definitely like to volunteer to do.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to encourage the board and the administration to think about how the education and the understanding of COVID is going to be framed for our kids and our teachers, because it is a definite reality that it's going to come back. And I'm trying to teach my kids that COVID will come and someone will get it. Kids, teachers, somebody likely will get it. Somebody, it's going to enter our community sometime this winter. And we need to accept and prepare for that fact. And that it's not a reflection of that person or their hygiene or anything they did to deserve a stigma. And so I kind of want to make sure that in the teaching and the education in the beginning that this is brought forward, because we need to teach the acceptance of the fact that it's going to happen. I think my last point is I would like the board to consider a medical task force of healthcare professionals in town to help them navigate the recommendations from the state for safe reopening. As you probably all know, another bulletin came out today. It would help you understand, for me, the most important pieces of teaching are 1, wear a mask, 2, wash, sanitize your hands frequently after touching common spaces. So if you want to pass out papers and have every child, say sanitize your hands. But most importantly, if you touch a piece of paper that someone else has touched, it's okay unless you touch your face. So the most important thing that we need to teach our children is don't touch your face. And I think that the board and the staff could benefit from the expertise of many people in this town. So I just like to throw that out there. And that's all. And it's Amanda Gilman, Westbridge Circle, Kentucky. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate it. And those are good thoughts. Really appreciate it. Next speaker is Emily Gula. Hi, Emily. Thank you for joining.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Hi, I'm Emily Gula, 169 Spring Street. Want to say thanks to everyone for all your work, for putting all this together and the thought. And as I've been listening to this meeting and other ones, I've thought about, what problem are we trying to solve? And it seems like the problem we're trying to solve is how to educate kids during a pandemic. But I think a lot of that's missing right now is the education piece. When I think about what we talked about, the past several hours, is how to get kids to a building in a bus, how are we going to pay for that? How are we going to keep the school clean? And what happens if somebody gets sick? And I'm worried that so much staff time is devoted to that logistic piece, that what happens to the schooling piece? If we're the school board, if the purpose of this, what is the purpose of schooling? And I know we're dealing with schooling at a different time, but I just don't want us to lose sight of the education piece. And I think what Seth mentioned, what Bonnie said, early on, what is the best scenario for students to learn? And I think consistency, and I think planning time for teachers to figure out how do I teach best remotely is a good use of our time. So I just want us to keep that in mind as we're thinking about these plans, that of course logistics are hugely important, but if what is the purpose of schooling, just want to make sure we keep that in mind too. Thanks.
Emily, thank you so much for your comment. And I do know that Steve and his team are thinking both about logistics, which I think we're focusing on here, but I know his team's thinking a lot about the educational component as well. So, but I do appreciate it. It's a good point.
Oh yes, and I have full confidence in the education and the teaching staff, not at all to miss all their efforts. I just know that how many of their efforts are being spent having to think about the logistics.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. Next hand raised is Dennis Wallner. Hi, Dennis. Thanks for joining.
Hi. Thanks everybody for working through unprecedented times. I know you guys have been working around the clock, and I know it's not made easier by the whole budget dilemma. My only concern is we have 4 children. 2 have been through the school system and 2 are still in it. And I have a high school junior who didn't have a great experience distance learning. He's one of the 100 or so kids that signed the petition to go back as well. My concern is that there's never going to be a better time to try to go back to school. You can't do any better than weeks and weeks and weeks of 0 cases. I know everybody said, people aren't wearing masks around town and there'd be more COVID and it would spread. Miraculously, we still have 0 cases, even with people traveling, out of state, flying, etc. I believe it's going to come back. We're going to see it here. We're going to see it everywhere. But in the instance where we don't have any currently, I think it's unthinkable to me that we would start from a position of we can't go back. I'd like to see the board and everybody working to figure out how we can go back. And certainly if there's a spike in cases before we're ready to go, we would have to make a decision otherwise. But some form of in-person educating to me is essential. I think we proved in the spring that it was absolutely essential in the fact that we're talking about students trying to catch up from all that they lost in the spring when we haven't really come up with a better plan now. Over the summer, I appreciate that people have summers, but we're thinking of going into the fall with a largely the same approach. And I feel like that's going to, for somebody like my son, that's going to make for a pretty awful way to have another year of lost. And I really do believe that if we don't plan on figuring out how to go back now, how are we going to do it in the middle of the school year when we're dealing with all these hard questions? And so there are lots of hard questions in figuring out how to go remotely, how to go hybrid, how to go anything else. But if our fallback is always, we'll just go for what we think is less risk and not do it, I think we don't ever have to make the hard decisions. And so I'd like to see a commitment from the board and others to find a way to do the best we can to allow for at least an in-person option for those children and parents that think it's essential at all schools, at all levels. And I think that my support for the budget really says that to me, if we don't think that in-person learning is important with our teachers and we don't need to be in our buildings, then I would ask the question, do we need our budget? And I think that if you can, look somebody straight in the eye and say, no, it's just as good virtually, then how do you ask them to vote for a budget where we're spending money on these facilities that you've just said we don't need? So I'd really like to see the commitment to go for it. It may last a day, a week, a month, but at least we'll get those relationships with the students and teachers set up. We'll learn how things go so that if we have to close and then reopen, we'll know how to reopen. So I don't mean to monopolize the time and ramble on, but I'd really like to see a commitment to give it a shot, a real effort to give it a shot. And I fully realize that we may have to change directions in hours, days, weeks, or months down the road. And thank you for all you guys do.
Thanks, Dennis. And stay tuned. So we did just discuss, throughout the meeting that we're trying to put together a plan to meet the expectation that you just laid out. And so we'll be back. It sounds like maybe on Tuesday to get sort of a check-in, and then on Thursday for Steve to present a plan that lays out what a hybrid model will look like to get the kids back in school. And hopefully we can make it all work. That's what I heard tonight was what the board's looking to see if we can make happen. So I don't know if that's enough of a commitment, but that's what we're striving for. So thanks for your comments. Next, Mark Zankel. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Jim.
How are you? Thanks for calling.
Thank you. Thank you all to the board. You're doing an incredible job and such a thoughtful conversation, and I appreciate all the work that you obviously are doing in between meetings to educate yourselves and to help Steve and the team think through all these complicated scenarios. So I don't want to repeat stuff that other people have said. So many great comments from people who've already spoken. I do want to just talk quickly about or share my thoughts on masks. And, you know, the science is clear, and I just want to say I hope that if there is a return to in-person school in whatever capacity you all decide it is workable, that there is a very clear and unambiguous mask wearing mandate. You know, this is behavior that can be normalized. I have seen it in communities that are doing it. I saw it this past weekend. If it is normalized and it is clear and unambiguous, and there's accountability for those who are not following the rules, it's doable. The kids will get on board. Will it be easy? No. Will it be an adjustment? Sure. But it has to be clear. It has to be unambiguous. There has to be consequences for people who are unwilling to follow those rules. I totally agree with Rob. The teachers should be empowered to enforce those rules. I realize that that is an imposition on teachers to have to enforce those rules, just like it's an imposition on an employee of TJ Maxx or any other store that is requiring masks to have to enforce those rules. But this is the time we're living in, and it's unfair to other students and faculty and support staff if they're not empowered and asked, frankly, to enforce those rules. So I hope that that is very clearly and unambiguously part of the mix for any return to school plan that you have. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate the comments. And we did talk about the mask mandate, and I know Andrea and Seth on the policy committee are drafting up, but I think feedback was an unambiguous mask requirement. So we appreciate the comments. Next hand that was raised is Jeremy Freitas. Jeremy, thanks. You should. Oh, there you go. You're unmuted yourself. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, school board, and thank you, Steve. I just want to thank you guys all for engaging us in an open and honest dialogue. I know these aren't easy times, and I appreciate everyone having a little flexibility and putting our kids first. You know, at the end of the day, as others have said, the education of our children is something worth fighting for. It's something worth wrestling with. It's something worth negotiating the logistics on. You know, we've got to keep in mind that the kids are at the foremost of our thoughts on what we do here. I also want to thank, you know, leaders in our community. Amanda Gilman, thank you for stepping up, and not just for your thought, but also for your pledge to make this work, to find, you know, go that step further. That's what a leader does, is looks at the next line of what we're going to need to support our school board and to support our teachers and our students in this endeavor. And if that's a full day mask mandate or whatever those rules are to keep everybody safe, you know, that we ask all parents listening, all teachers listening to comply, you know, that we can all do this as a team effort. So if we look at it like we're all on the same team and not on opposite sides, then I think we'll be successful. And if we fail to do that as adults and as human beings with each other's best interest at heart, we will fail. And I would say to the school board, you know, we have a vote in front of us this weekend. You know, there's money on the line here. And the biggest issue is not the finances in this town, it's trust. And we have to trust one another. Everybody in this town has to come together and trust one another. So we will trust you, and we appreciate your thoughts in this and consideration on this matter. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your comments. Next hand is, I pronounce names awful, and this isn't, I don't know if this is a name, but Victoria? I didn't say that right. What is it?
Victoria.
I get at least the letters right. Thanks for joining us. Oh, you're still muted. So if you want to mute your line. Oh, I think you're still muted. If you unmute. You said it was Karen?
I think so.
Yeah, Karen, if you unmute your line, right now we can't hear you. And I was gonna say if there, we could try again in a few minutes, but I think Karen's the last hand we had up. So Karen, we can give you one more try if you can unmute your line.
Are we unable to unmute her for her?
I've tried. I don't know if that's in my skill set.
Well, Diane LaChance raised her hand, so she's going to give Karen another shot. So if we can unmute Diane, and then we'll come back to Karen. Hi, Diane. Thanks for joining. Diane, you have to unmute your line.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you. I figured I might as well jump in while we give Karen a chance. I was didn't want to keep you any later tonight, but I just wanted to I'll give you all a breather. I have no more questions, and I wanted to thank everybody for clearly answering my questions. That's it's been wonderful 2 weeks talking to Norm, Ron, and the questions were hard, and you guys really came up to bat and simply answered them, and I appreciate it. It's clear, and I wish you the best, because this next step that you have to take is difficult, and I don't think there's any right answers. So just know that the community is supporting you, and take it a day at a time. And just wanted the opportunity to say thank you, and looking forward to working with you on the budget stuff as we go forward when you have time to get back to that.
It's going to come sooner than you think, but thank you, Diane. Really appreciate, and your questions are hard, but they're fair and good. So we appreciate that as well.
Okay, good night.
Have a good night. And so Jennifer Blagriff raised her hand. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, I just wanted to quickly thank everyone. I thought that this was a really great conversation. I just wanted to kind of echo what Andrea said a little bit ago about assessments. I just really want to support those assessments of kids being done, and then also the communication of those assessments with parents. So if STAR testing is done, if AIMSweb or EasyCBM is done, I really hope that that information will be shared with parents as well as the more informal assessments by teachers, just their take on things and what they're seeing in the classroom or over Zoom. Just because parents are going to be so much more involved in their teaching of their children this school year, that I just really think that communication piece is key. And then, is it okay to mention the budget or during this public comment? Yeah, okay. So yeah, I just wanted to encourage people to vote for the budget. I think it's really important that we go for this budget. And I love how the community is so engaged right now and everything. And I would ask that community members be this engaged at the beginning of the budget process, because if we really want change to happen in town and we want to be involved in this process, we really need to be involved from the beginning. Not at the end. That's just my personal opinion, that we just need to be very involved. And I think there are definitely improvements that need to be done in our schools. I think lots of people in town have great ideas. And I would just encourage people to be involved at the start of the budget season. So that's all.
Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate your comments. All right, and I don't see any, oh, I do. Judy C. Hold on one moment. Hi, Judy. Thank you for joining.
Hi, good evening. Thanks again for this great session. You know, listening to everything and all the parents and my daughter and the kids have all been gathered around the computer tonight. And one of the conversations we were having was that it almost feels like no matter what decision is made, in the end, it could be the wrong decision, or it could be the right decision. There's just so much that's unknown. And, you know, you're grappling with issues that you really don't have a crystal ball for. And I'm hoping that you all take to heart and realize that when things go wrong, and they may, that, you know, you've considered the liability in all of this. because it's a no-win situation for you, right? You want to do the right things for the kids to get them socialized. But in the models that you're looking at, I can't help but think that there's a potential for disaster. So you got the littles in school, somebody drops the ball on complete sanitization, a little brings it home, mom, grandma, or kids that are in remote learning become infected. I mean, these are real situations and scenarios that could happen. I spent almost 20 years working in open heart surgery, and we had some situations where the ball was dropped and infections occurred and people died. And that was something that we had to come to grips with, and we knew was a potential incident that could occur. So I'm hoping that you all understand that, and you're taking it to heart, and people realize that you're taking it to heart, that errors can happen, incidents can occur, and infections may happen. And, the worst case result is, people contract the disease and don't survive. So this is really not an issue of socialization of the kids and giving the kids what they want, but, the underlying things that you're grappling with and have to come to terms with are, you don't have the crystal ball and you don't really know what's right or what's wrong. And I just hope that everyone listening tonight or posting on Facebook or venturing opinions and what ifs really understands that this is just not about starting school. This is about healthy community, protecting everyone and dealing with something that you've never had to deal with before. You can't apply logic and norms for something that is not logical or normal anymore. So I just, I hope that the school is, and all of you are prepared to undertake that liability, and to really, that the community understands that this is really a kind of a no-win situation. And, my heart goes out to all of you for having to struggle with this. That's all.
Thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate it. Norm, did you want to say something?
I just want to say, it is about, getting these kids back to learn. I mean, that's why we're here. We want our kids to go back to school safe at some capacity. And, we are, I have trust in Steve and his leadership and his team to bring something to us next week where we can evaluate as a board and look at the risk assessment. But it is about our kids having some social and emotional support and to be with their friends and be able to have the educational value and something in person or remote, whatever it is. This board's committed to look at all the risks in order to make it happen.
Well, I understand that, Norm, and I hope that you're listening to understand and not just listening to respond, because everybody needs to do that. I mean, yes, it is about a lot of things, but the most important thing is that nobody's got that crystal ball, right?
I agree with you 100%. But I'm just saying, we're doing our best, and I appreciate your comments tonight. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Judy. Have
a good night.
Robert Matteo. Hi, Robert. You should be there. You go. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, Bob Matteo, 108 Park Ave. Wow, listening all to the, the comments tonight from everyone. It seems like I could get an expert to back up, any number of points that were brought up tonight. Just, want to give credit to the board. Just, this seems like just an extremely daunting task. And I wanted to make a new suggestion. Has anyone thought about just taking the year off? So yeah, that was supposed to bring a chuckle at this time of night. So I did want to say, just I appreciate all the work, guys. And I know it's a you can't please everyone on this, and I certainly don't have the right answer. So with that, good luck and good night, everyone.
Thank you, Bob. We really appreciate it. All right, I don't see any other hands. And so I am going to close the public comment portion of the meeting. Thank you, everyone who stuck with us and for your thoughtful comments. Really appreciate it. So we've done our action items for the evening. There's no other agenda items. I don't believe we have a need for a non-public this evening. So I guess I want to thank everybody. I want to remind and encourage everybody that Saturday there is a vote. I know we talked about it earlier, 8:30 until 2 over at the middle high school. Really appreciate voting in support of the budget. I think having a budget that we presented is going to help us as we make these difficult decisions we have to make. It's another piece of our of the puzzle, and I think if we're all committed to being able to manage the situation that we're in and try to do the best for our kids, whether that's remote or whether that's in person or it's a hybrid model, funding is part of the tool that's going to help us in our toolbox make this stuff happen. And so anyway, I know I'm speaking on behalf of the board when I ask for the support and the vote on the budget on Saturday. And with that, for the board, just stay tuned. We'll, if we have to have a meeting on Tuesday, we'll let you guys know earlier than later so we can plan accordingly. And if not, next Thursday at 5:30 is our next meeting.
I just want to say thank you to all the volunteers for this weekend. I know quite a few of us are going to be there. Thank you to everyone that's going to be helping out. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nora. Everybody have a good evening. If there's not, if there's no objection, we'll adjourn.
Oh.
All right.
Good night.
Good night, all.